Good morning, everyone. It's officially 8:32, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to chair this morning, and then Senator Schuler will chair tomorrow morning, and we'll carry on with that. So we have a decorum script that I'm supposed to read, but the gist of it is be nice or leave. So. So it says, I want to call your attention to the committee rules of decorum. Copies of the rules are located with the hard copies of the agenda. And then meetings are for open discussion, and we encourage discussion, and it needs to be civil. So the rules, although it may seem awkward formalities, speakers will address their comments and questions to the chairman, not to individual committee members or others in attendance. This helps us avoid personalities and comments of a personal nature. Comments will be directed to the issue under the discussion by the committee. Distracting comments or unrelated side issues are out of order. Speakers will avoid personal criticism, ridicule, or name calling directed toward anyone else in attendance at the meeting. For audience members, we expect you to refrain from any behavior that disrupts the orderly conduct of the meeting. And specifically, that means speaking out when another person is talking, carrying on loud and distracting conversations, and shouting or clapping or booing in response to others' comments. So I'm sure that's clear with this group, and I'm happy that you're all here and look forward to your comments. So now if we could do roll call.
Senator Baldwin. Senator Ellis. Senator Guru. Senator Jones. Representative Angelos. Representative Burkhart. Representative Byron. Representative Larson. Representative Singh. Representative Storer. Representative Western. Representative Winter. Co-Chairman Schuler. Chairman Newsom. You have a quorum.
Thank you. And now I would like to do the pledge. Thank you. So we will go ahead with our first thing on our second thing, I guess, is State Parks and Cultural Resources Director, or Interim Director Glenn, if you would give us a report.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. Dave Glenn, Acting Director of Wyoming State Parks and Cultural Resources. I really appreciate, and I want to reemphasize what you said. Thank you for being nice. First, I'd like to introduce a few of our staff that are here. Obviously, you know Nick Nealon, our Deputy Director, but we also have Misty Stahl in the back. She's the District Manager of our Absaroka District, so she came down from Buffalo to attend. And we have Amy Crawford with our Outdoor Recreation Office. She's one of our coordinators. Patrick Harrington, who many of you know, who runs our Outdoor Recreation Office. And we also have Kyle Bernice here as well. And many of you met Kyle. He's out of the Shoshone District. You probably met him at Evanston. And lastly, we have Angela Emery here, who is one of our State Parks and Cultural Resources Commissioners, representing kind of the area around Casper. So you'll hear me say this a lot in front of you all, and I can't say it enough, and it sounds kind of cliche, but our staff make the difference. It's these folks back here. They're the ones that work hard, they have vision, they have drive, and they make things happen. And I know sometimes you hear state employees kind of get chastised a little bit as being the lazy employees or other folks. And I will stand by this crew anytime, any day with the drive that they have. So I wanted to make sure that I introduce those folks. Madam Chairman, if it's all right, I'll dive into a few updates and then we'll pass on to Nick for the fun stuff. Great. Maybe we can start with the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. This is a plan that we are required to do through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We receive about $2.3 million a year from them, and our agency is a pass-through granting process that goes to communities for parks, rodeo grounds, baseball fields, those types of things. It's about a 50% match. We're required every year to put together a statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. We're in the process of putting that together right now. We've got a survey out that is online, and we've already, and within 2 weeks, we've had about 300 responses. And Patrick, I'll make sure that we send you a copy of the survey. It's about 10 to 15 minutes to take out, and we're actively trying to get input, because from that survey, we will develop our plan. And that tells us where we're going to put our money in the next 5 years through this LWCF funding. Moving on, many of you are aware of you're all aware of the museum level 1 and level 2 study. We talked about that a little bit in Evanston. We presented that to the State Building Commission a couple weeks ago. It was hot off the presses. They had not even had time to review it yet. And since the study had just come out, they kind of opted to take no action on that. And the reasoning being was that JAC Chairman Nicholas was there, and he said he was going to put something together and run it through JAC. So we have yet to have a conversation with him to see what that looks like, but that's kind of where that's sitting right now. And I also wanted to thank you kind of for the support for the pay increases. We are actually starting to see an uptick in job applications coming in when we have job positions open, and that's very exciting for us. We're getting some qualified candidates, and they're actually accepting jobs when we offer them the job, which is a big bonus. And I would add on to that, while this is for permanent employees, this is probably the first summer that we've been close to full with our seasonal employees as well, excluding our law enforcement, but that's been a big help for us in our parks. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about some new initiatives that we're doing. One of the things we've been really focusing on is how do we recruit more people, but also how do we keep our people that we have? And how do we get them to the level that they can move up within the organization? So we've started a mentoring program, and that's where mentors in leadership positions pair up with staff members, and we give personalized guidance and career objectives with them. And we kind of put together a good plan and a good organization. It supports professional growth, leadership ability, performance standards, encouraging employees to share and retain institutional knowledge, all of those things that can help a trade specialist when we hire them on and their job is to mow lawns and clean toilets, to get them the skills and other things necessary that they can take my job someday in the future. And the mentoring program is something we have been really focusing on, because that one-on-one really, really helps our staff. So we're excited about that. Another thing is that we've been really looking at internally is we've worked really hard, and I see Director Schober here, working with interagency communication. And I think we've done a really good job communicating with other agencies. Within our agency, we have 3 divisions. And at times, we can do a better job communicating intra-agency. I'll give you an example or two. We have 8 different granting programs in our agency where we grant out to communities. We have 8 different people working on those grants. Those people do not talk to each other that often. How do we share resources? How do we become more efficient? How do we work on those types of things? Same with things like, what's the word, Nick? Sorry. I always forget the word curators. I wanted to say archivists, but curators. And in our museum, we have several curators. We also have curators throughout our historic sites, and we're working to make sure that these folks are talking together. So to that end, we're actually going to have an annual meeting. We have an annual meeting every year with state park staff, and the cultural resource staff occasionally have annual meetings. We're going to bring them all together, and we're going to sit down and talk and learn about what everybody else does and how we can help each other within the agency. So we're excited about that. A couple of other things that we're doing, we've really focused on customer service this summer. Our team is killing it right now. And our job is to improve communities and enrich lives, and that's what we do. And customer service is #1 on that. And we're not calling it a policy, but it's more of a strategy that we're going to get back to every single individual that reaches out to us, whether it's you in the legislature, whether it's a customer that calls with a reservation problem, whether it's the governor's office, or whether it's anybody else. Within 24 hours, we are going to get back to those people. And even if we don't know the answer, we're going to let them know we hear them, and we're going to get back to you. And that's going to be an emphasis for us, is kind of getting back to that basics of customer service and making sure that we're taking care of our people in our parks, at the museums, and other places. A couple of other updates. Many of you are aware of and heard about the plan for the Via Ferrata in Sinks Canyon State Park. The Via Ferrata is a series of cables and rungs that allow people new to the sport of climbing or with disabilities to kind of get introduced to the sport. When we went through our planning process at Sinks Canyon, that kind of rose to the top to put a Via Ferrata in at Sinks Canyon. And there was a group that opposed that within the local community. And we made the decision that we were going to move forward with that until we hit a roadblock that we could not overcome. Well, 2 weeks ago, we hit that roadblock. Nick came to me and said, it's going to cost this much dollars for us to get this surveyed by an engineer to make sure that it's safe for us to put these on the wall. And we looked at it and I said, I cannot justify spending that much money. So we pulled the plug on that. So that project has gone away. Luckily, there are plenty of other communities requesting new amenities in our state parks, and we're going to put our resources into those communities that are actually clamoring and wanting those types of things. And this is one that I'll talk about next. I think this is a good win for us. And Chairman Newsom, you've been instrumental in helping make this happen. The Outlaw Trail, and actually Amy Crawford as well, who has facilitated the Outdoor Recreation Collaborative in Park County. And the Outlaw Trail is a trail that one of the user groups came to one of our collaboratives, and I'll step back a little bit. Many of you are aware of the collaboratives that we put together, but we bring state agencies and federal agencies and local community leaders, and then NGOs and private businesses and anybody that's interested to talk about what do we want to do for outdoor recreation in your community. We don't parachute in and say, this is how you need to do it. We say, what do you want? Let us help you get there. The advantage of the state convening this is it helps us keep some of the other federal agencies' feet to the fire. You can go as a citizen and talk with a district ranger about something and they go, yeah, that's great, thank you. But when you have a group of people and the state behind it, they listen a little bit more and go through that process. So with the Outlaw Trail, one of the user groups came and said, we want to create a mountain bike complex kind of north of town, and we want to create all these trails. And the motorized community came in and said, well, we need access through that to get up to Rattlesnake Mountain and to access some of those things. And it was one of those things where we all sat down, we all put a plan together. Not everybody didn't get exactly what they wanted, but they did get something out of it. So that process right now, the NEPA has been done by the BLM. It's in the comment period. But to me, we're excited about it because it shows our strength in bringing together all these people. And really, it's taught us that controversy is not something you avoid, it's something you lean into. Like, let's lean into this, let's figure out how we get to that win-win. And that's a really good example of how we hope to do that with the Outlaw Trail. Next steps, then we look at some potential funding for that, either through some of these tourism dollars that we have, or ARPA funds, if that's a possibility, which it probably isn't, or potentially the Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund down the road.
So I just want to thank you for that. I just wanted to comment on that. Actually, at our Park County Travel Council meeting, which is our lodging tax board, we had destination development funds, and we funded a pit toilet for the Outlaw Trails. So we're excited about that.
Madam Chairman, that's great to hear. And that's the great thing about being able to leverage these dollars as well to move those forward. I just want to highlight a couple of things coming up as well, and then we'll punt it to Nick. The State Historic Preservation Office's annual Centennial Farm and Rent celebration is August 19th. That is in Douglas at the Douglas Intermediate School. The celebration honors Wyoming families who have owned and operated a farm or ranch for 100 years or more. They get a nice plaque, they get a sign that they put up front, and they actually have a yearbook with those folks that talks about their family and their property. We've done this for 17 years. This is our 17th year. We've given out 333 awards, and we're giving out 12 this year. Usually the governor and the congressional delegation comes as well. There's a barbecue afterwards, and I want to make sure that you all were invited to attend that next Saturday in Douglas if you're interested. Next is there's an art summit that will be hosted in Sheridan, October 27th through the 29th. This happens biennially. It's hosted by the Wyoming Arts Council, and that's where we bring artists throughout the state to learn from one another and empower the state's creative sector. So there's sessions and workshops that talk about professional development. It's not only for artists, but for advocates, administrators, and educators as well. And Madam Chairman, I would probably finish off. I know the committee talked about potentially when in Cheyenne, touring the Unicover building or potentially the Arboretum or the museum, and just wanted to throw that out that we'd be happy to work with you on that if that's something you decided to do.
Thank you, Director Glenn. That would be great. We love field trips. It's our favorite thing about this committee. So we'll set something up as we go forward for our next meeting. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And when we get to the Unicover building and tour kind of the archives of the museum, just you will find me in the saddles and brands section. That's usually where I hang out for the whole time. With that, Madam Chairman, I would stand for any questions, and if not, we can move on to Nick's piece.
Senator Grew.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning,
Good morning, sir.
Acting Director. What an act it is. Good act so far. Academy Award stuff. Question on you were talking about the Outlaw Trail, and you were talking about ARPA funds, and you said probably wouldn't work. Why?
Director Glenn.
Madam Chairman, Senator Guru, we have been working through a process, and I may end up dragging Patrick up here because he's been the guru of all things ARPA. What we have found is we have started to go through the process, working with the Budget Office and the Attorney General's office, is when we first started looking at this with them, we thought that the opportunities were going to be broader than they are. And as we have dived deeper into these, what we are finding out is it's disproportionate communities that need to be involved in these. So Cody is not, and there is a legal term for disproportionate communities. There's certain incomes, certain things that have to happen. So for what we're looking at, we're trying to do everything we can in those 71 applications with ARPA dollars to see what we can do to connect them to disproportionate communities, but many of those are not going to be eligible due to the federal regulations on that.
Follow up, Senator.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Uh-oh. I didn't mean to turn this into a thing. It is going to kind of play into a discussion we're going to have later, so I kind of want to get it straight now. How, just across the breadth so far, how many disproportionate communities are there that would qualify? Out of that 71, you said 71 applications or whatever that you've got pending right now?
Director Glenn.
Just throw a number at me.
Or is that?
Madam Chairman and Senator Grew, Patrick Harrington, Manager of the Office of Outdoor Recreation. See if I can't keep this from giving us a ton of feedback. We received $71 million total in applications, over 117 applications for that initial $12 million of ARPA funds. As Director Glenn said, and described it as a funnel. When we started, we had a lot of what we thought was leniency and how we were going to make these projects apply to the rules of ARPA. As we walked through that process, those federal ARPA direct dollars just had more and more strings attached. And when they released the final rule, the way we qualified it, and I'm going to do my best to not get too deep in the weeds, but give you a real sense of what's going on. But as we qualified those projects, the rationale that we were using was for community amenities, which was really the only way to qualify new construction. And it came with the added piece, as Director Glenn was mentioning, of disproportionately impacted communities, which is a federal treasury term that means a median household income below $40,626 per year for a household of 3 people. In Wyoming, the best way to demonstrate that, and we've modeled it a couple of ways, was through qualified census tracts. We're actually either sitting in one or only a few blocks away from one here in downtown Casper. There's one in northeast Rock Springs, sort of where the golf course is, and in that kind of northeast quadrant of the city. One in Albany County that is a large percentage of the city of Laramie, and then the Wind River Reservation. And those are really the limits, I will say. So that's how we looked at the first round of funding. The second round will open up to impacted communities, which is an additional treasury definition that is between 40,626 and $65,000 and some change. And that allows for maintenance projects, but not capital expenditures. And so there won't be new construction in those areas, but it does open up a significant portion of Wyoming to receive those ARPA dollars. And we know there's a significant backlog in maintenance across the entire state and all sorts of land management schemes that really just need maintenance dollars. And so we think a very effective use of that, but certainly was not quite the intention up front. And so it's really driven by federal requirements on these dollars that are sort of limiting our ability to use them.
Senator?
One more follow-up and then I'll let it go. Do you think in subsequent rounds of this money coming out that there might be further clarification, further expansion of this? Because it's, like I say, it's something that's got to come into a conversation we're going to have in a little bit. So I want to kind of get it straight. Because I'd kind of heard that there was going to be a little bit broader than what you're indicating. And so I want to kind of see where the...
Madam Chairman and Senator Guru, thank you for that question. I do, I guess I don't know that there's going to be any additional leniency from the U.S. Treasury, and so we're sort of playing with the set of rules that we have. But I do anticipate, and a lot of it's already built out, we just haven't announced yet because we're still waiting on those final project approvals, but we will have additional guidance from my office, and including a GIS map that will allow people to point to their spot on the map and say, these are the types of projects we can qualify in our region of the state.
Senator? Any other questions? Co-Chairman Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question, first of all, I'd like to say I appreciate the fact you do an annual meeting and you're trying to bring together all of the folks that are, so important. And I think that's really important. And then the fact that you're emphasizing customer service, I think that's number one for me also, because that's what we hear is if things aren't going well, it's usually that. So appreciate that. My question is basically with the pay increases, you mentioned how that's really helped to get quality folks. Are you guys fully staffed right now?
Director?
Madam Chairman, we're almost never fully staffed. Having said that, we've had positions that have been open for years that we have finally filled. So, we have positions come and go and people move on and or move up. Those positions we're being able to fill, but some of those difficult to fill positions, we've had an engineering position in our construction and engineering office literally open for 2 years, and the guy started 2 weeks ago, and it's already made a huge difference for us.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I guess we'll move on. So Nick, are you up now?
Madam Chairman, Nick Nealon, Deputy Director, State Parks, Historic Sites. Just a couple of updates on some projects that we've talked to you about before. First one is the Sutton site, the Sutton Archaeological Site. The staff is out there right now with the surveyor, today, in fact, doing a drone survey. It's their third attempt to survey the property. I'm learning a lot about mining claims in Wyoming. The maps that we were given by the Sutton Estate were far from accurate maps, and so we're having some trouble locating some of the corners. The claims overlap with one another, and so it's taken 3 surveys to get out there and try to define what exactly the property is that we've taken on. We hope to have that concluded fairly soon, and then we'll move on to the cultural survey, as we've mentioned before. So we're on top of it, it's just taking a little bit longer than we thought. The reservation system RFP is something I've mentioned to you before as well. The process has been concluded. We've selected a company to go with. It'll be a different company than we have in the past, which was Aspira. The winner of the RFP process was USE Direct, and we're finishing negotiations with them on a contract right now. They're bringing a lot to the table, and we hope to just continue to improve what we've been doing for all these years. It's a pretty exciting time. We're looking forward to the change. There will be one thing that's going to be interesting is that we have a lot of problems with duplicate accounts in our reservation system. Some people have as many as 5, 6 accounts. And so instead of switching everybody over to the new system, we're going to not migrate any data. and we're just going to ask everybody to sign up for a new account. So that'll be a lot of public relations effort on our part to get the word out there that come November, hopefully, you're going to get on there and register for a new account in advance so that you're ready to go when the reservation system opens back up. Should be a great thing for our system.
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Nick, quick question for you. My recollection is the bill that set up the Sutton site and authorized that had very specific surveying information in it. Now, I'm thinking purely off memory here. With what you're saying and the surveys being wrong, claims overlapping, will we need to go back in and modify that because that's set in statute as to where the corners are and everything else? Will we need to look at doing that in the future?
Nick.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Representative Burkhart, I would imagine that's probably exactly the case because the property that we are going to end up with is not looking like it's going to match what was in the original deed of gift from the estate of Mr. Sutton.
Follow up, Madam Chairman?
Yes.
Excuse me. So Nick, when will you have all the final on all of that information, do you think?
Nick.
Madam Chairman, Representative Burkhart, we hoped that we would have had it several months ago because we've been working on the survey for quite a while. It took a little while to go through the process to do the RFP, to hire the surveyor, get them out there. Again, they've been out there. This is their third time. They finally brought a drone out in hopes that they can use it to locate some of the corners they're having a hard time finding. They're also finding, as I mentioned earlier, that the claim from Mr. Sutton is potentially overlapping with some other claims that are out there. And so we're going to have to work through what that looks like when the time comes. So honestly, I can't tell you exactly when we'll have that information, hopefully soon.
Okay.
Representative.
So, Madam
you have a
Chairman,
follow-up?
Well, I think we need to look at potentially a bill to modify that original to match the exact survey, because we don't want to be setting something up that overlaps with someone else's property.
Madam Chair?
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think when we looked at the Sutton property originally, if you look at the other archaeological sites, they didn't have that level of detail. We could write something more general and broad that doesn't have the exact location. The reason we actually tried to do that was to alleviate concerns that somehow we'd be going out there and acquiring massive amounts of land. You know, and we did hear that on my side of the chamber for sure. So I think we don't even maybe have to have the exact description. We could have it probably more general. So that's a solution. We might ask for a bill draft, at least in that, to have some general language that kind of matches how the other archaeological sites are described in our statutes.
So Senator, we had that same concern on our side, on the House side as well. Follow up. Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chairman and Representative, we'll get you that information as soon as we have it, and then we can make that determination as we go forward. Our visitation numbers are a little up this year. After 2020, the COVID spike, we saw some downturn over the next couple of years as people kind of went back to normal. They're back up again a little bit this year. Our reservations are up 4%, and our visitations up a little bit more than 2%. So that's trending in a positive direction. We're excited to see the numbers perking back up again. The semi-quincentennial effort is moving along. As you're aware, I'm sure the governor issued an executive order creating a semi-quincentennial task force. And the more you say it, the easier it gets. Semi-quincentennial task force. And they are working right now to identify and speak with the members people who are interested in serving as members, I should say, on the task force. And a conversation I had earlier with someone in the governor's office said that they hope to have that set by sometime early this fall, and then start the task force to doing their work at that point. And then the final update I have is just a brief update on the Arboretum. I don't want to talk about it too much because we are going to discuss it tomorrow during the bill draft, I'm sure. But the site criteria process has been completed. I got an email from our head of our planning section last night not in time to get you, not in time to get the information to you, but I will have a handout for you in the morning that summarizes the site criteria process and talks about all the things that we've done to get to the point that we are. We have some cost estimates in that that'll talk about how much we think it's going to take to operate this site on an annual basis, and how much capital construction money we think we would need upfront to get the facilities back to the condition where they need to be. We've also met with Office of Forestry as part of that process, and I believe they're going to be here tomorrow to testify as well on behalf of the bill. So apologies for not getting it to you sooner, but it just, I didn't get it till late last night.
Any questions? Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I guess, is that it? That's it for state parks?
Madam Chairman, we're trying to keep you on time and ahead of schedule, so yes,
You are
ma'am.
awesome. We sure appreciate that. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to get behind. But we appreciate your effort. Okay, we'll move on to item number 3, the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust Fund. Looks like we have Director Bud here. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
Heather's going to get the PowerPoint up,
Okay.
and we'll go through this. I'm going to try and do 2 or 3 things simultaneously so that we can, again, save a little time for you. We'll go through our process. We'll give an update as to where we are. I've sent materials out, had Heather and Luke sent those out. I think you got them all. Let me explain what you got, because I think sometimes, particularly for those who have not been familiar with it, you got the large database sheet is a tracking that we use for all the projects we've ever done, whether they get done or not. For instance, if somebody comes in, has a project, and then withdraws that project, it still stays on that tracking sheet. There was a contract written for it. It is in our system, but you'll see that in there it'll say that one has not been done. It's voided out. That way we can keep track of not only the fiscal, but also the cumulative effect of the program over time. It is interesting that in our statute, it calls for an annual audit. We started the program in 2005. We had our first annual audit this year. Someone noticed that and came racing in. The audit was a no-finding audit. They said it was the first one that he could remember. He's been an auditor for 15 years, where they found nothing. And actually are going to incorporate some of the process that we use into other reporting and other processes. And a big part of that is that tracking sheet, so that you can go back at any point in time and say, this is where we are. So we're very proud of that. It was something we just invented out of whole cloth. And the other things that you have both of the final decision PowerPoints that we used both last fall and this spring. We do that every time we roll that forward, so you can look at what the projects are. When we do that report to you at the end of every year, we have all of those in a sheet with photos that you can see kind of what they are. And then we'll go through this PowerPoint. So I apologize, I'm going to have to turn to be able to see it occasionally, but the program was established in 2005, as I said. It's been funded by appropriations, by donations, and by interest. The goal at the time it was established was a minimum of $200 million in the fund. It was expected at that time that would generate about $8 to $10 million a year. That's probably less than what we could use, but it's been, I just ran the numbers the other day, over the course of the entire program, going back to the first year when we didn't have much money to spend, to years where we spent fairly significant amounts, we've averaged about 7.5 million per year in grants. So that 8 to 10 is right on target. It depends a little bit, and we'll go through that on what you get as far as applications. Go ahead, Heather. We have a 9-member board. They're appointed by judicial districts and confirmed by the Senate. The interests include local government, oil and gas, ag. Originally, they were 3-year terms. So we had some appointed for 1 year, some for 2, some for 3. And in about 2008, then Representative Mike Baker, y'all remember Mike from Thermopolis, and I were doing site visits. And came to the conclusion that that system was not going to work. You could roll that whole board in 3 years. And this board needs stability. And I think I've talked to you in regard to the Recreation Trust Fund. It's important that you have that because it's a working board. So it changed to 6-year terms in 2011. We went through the process, tried to figure out, is it 4-year? Is it what? And the number was 6 to make it all work. My board meets 6 times annually throughout the state. The February meeting is always in Cheyenne. That's the only one that is in one place. Our August meeting, and I hope some of you can join us in Du Bois next week, is always a tour. It's incredibly fun to do and to see stuff. We're going to have a full day next week. We're going to look at forestry projects, river projects, bighorn sheep projects. We're going to hit the gamut of it up in Du Bois. So if you can join us, we'd love to have you there. Go ahead, Heather. Let me quickly introduce who our board members are. Our chairman, Steve Meadows from Jackson, represents tourism, motel owner up there. He and his family, long time, he's an avid sportsman. Christy Haswell from Sheridan is a county commissioner. She wasn't when she came on the board, but represents county government. Kim Floyd, our past chairman, sportsman's representative. He's been an outfitter, a guide. He used to work for AFL-CIO. Moving on, Don Schramm from Rock Springs, retired from the BLM. He's an engineer and surveyor. He currently works for Rock Springs Grazing Association, so there represents minerals, wind, wildlife, wild horses, you got it all there. Esther Wagner from Casper, the oil and gas industry. She worked for Petroleum Association of Wyoming for a number of years, worked for Devon before that, currently works for the Western Energy Alliance. Mike Massey, a retired senator from Albany County, conservation representative. Mike was one of the co-sponsors of the bill that started this program and has been a very avid participant. The next, Jacqueline Downey from Moorcroft, representing conservation. Jacqueline works for Audubon. This is a bit of a miracle. I will point out that we had a required split in our board, had to be 5 and 4, Republican, Democrat, or split. And that seat came up and somebody said, oh yeah, you're gonna find a Democrat in Moorcroft or in Crook County and that part of the state. And yes, we did, as a matter of fact. And she's a great board member, a biologist. J.D. Williams, some of you know J.D. from his term in the House, just came on the board this year, represents ranching, agriculture, lives outside of Lusk. And finally, our vice chairman is Pidge Fulton from Powell. Pidge is a farmer up there, but he's also an avid fisherman. He is currently in Alaska fishing. We don't know if we'll ever see him again or if he'll come back, but he and Cindy are up there. So it's a really, really well-rounded board. They're incredibly thoughtful and incredibly dedicated, and I can't say enough about how this model has worked because of the board. Next. The purpose is very broad. I'm not going to go through this. It's in the statute. It's in the rules. There are just 4 things we can't do. Heather, the next one. There are a few other things that we do that people aren't aware of. We do program funding, we do mitigation, and we do banking. So we've held funds for Shell Oil, as an example, in the western side of the state for a long-term project. They put in $500,000. We were able to match some of that. We got other matching funds. That was administered by the Mule Deer Foundation. That project's completed, but we did that. We've done other things like bark beetle and post-fire. That's been with appropriations specific from the legislature to address those issues. You've also done specific appropriations for invasive species and wild horses. Very few things are off limits. Next. There are the things we cannot do. We can't purchase land, we can't purchase water rights, we can't introduce endangered species, and we can't require public access. Other than that, the door's wide open. And
Madam Chair.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you. Bob, you're moving really fast, but I want to back up just a little bit
Yeah.
about your board composition and the political split. I've been looking at boards and commissions a little bit this interim on my own. Do you think there's value in still having the Republican-Democrat split that's in there, or do you see a purpose or a value in that?
Bob?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, I've always thought there was a value in that. However, you have to remember that I was raised in a day and age when there was about 60-40 split between the parties in the state. And now it's more difficult, I think, for some people to find board members. I still believe that there ought to be some kind of a philosophical split. You can achieve that without it being Republican, Democrat. There are enough independents now in the state that you can pick that up. I would hate to see it become a one, all blue, all red, that kind of thing. What I love about our board is from day one, I've had a standing bet with people that if they came to a meeting and they could name which one of them were Republican or Democrat and get them all right, I would buy the beer. I've had a lot of free beer because they don't act that way. I mean, one of our most conservative members who just went off was an ardent Democrat. And, you know, that's the beauty of it. You get a different perspective if you have some kind of a split. But that may be an outdated view too.
Senator.
Just to follow up, maybe a better way of asking it is, with your board, you know, you mentioned you have people who represent county, local government, energy, conservation. I mean, to me, that is the dictation of how you get some diverse viewpoints on that board. So I'm just curious, Madam Chair, I know this is an ongoing issue, and we see it more on the Senate side when we look at confirmation.
Madam Chair, I think that's the beauty of it. If you're diligent in how that board gets selected and in how you vet people, you're going to get that diversity, and we certainly have.
Any other questions before we move on? Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Budd, you're not allowed to require access, as you say. On average, I know you do a handful of conservation easements every year, or certainly up for consideration. When you do engage in those consultations and those discussions with landowners, how often do you even bring up the possibility of access?
Madam Chair, Representative Western, we always bring it up. It's not a requirement. We just ask the question. The issue with access, and you and I have had this conversation many times, is define that. There are groups out there who define access as anybody who wants to go on that property at any time of the year can go on that property. There are others, including me, who define access as if Representative Burkhart says, I'd like to hunt on your place, and I say, yes, I've granted access. So you've got the extreme from me allowing one person access to hunt to opening it to anyone and everyone. Most of the easements that we do, there is a level of access granted. Some of them grant public access across the board, but that's a separate agreement. That is not what the easement purpose is. So we always tell them that has to be done as a separate entity. You grant the easement, we do that, then the access piece becomes a separate contract, and that's usually administered by Game and Fish.
Representative, a follow-up? Okay. Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So Bob, are there any projects you've done where you specifically want to deny access due to the criticality of the project?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, yes. That's primarily a seasonal consideration. For instance, if it's an elk calving area, or it's a crucial winter range, or it's an area stopover in migration, that may be a part of the consideration. That's usually guided by local knowledge and by the wildlife agency in the state. But yeah, there are places where you don't want human presence, just as there are places where you can tolerate a great deal of it. The other thing that maybe is an add-on, Representative Western, we also have leased access on a number of places around the state. So someone will come in and say, I'm willing to open this up, whether it's through a permit system or wide open. Mule Creek in Albany County is an example of that. It's a 20-year lease agreement to allow public access. That's been incredibly helpful to control elk populations. We have done that in several instances around the state. So it's another thing that we can do that addresses the access question.
Follow-up? Anybody else? Question? Representative Storr.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, but does your board have term limits? And is that something you guys have discussed in the past?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Storr, we do not. And we have tried to kind of figure that out. The reason that we don't is when we change the term from 3 to 6 years, you could not put a term limit on it because there wasn't on the previous. And so the interpretation of that statute change was you couldn't come in and impose something on someone post facto. I took it at their word. Generally, most of our people will serve 2 terms, 12 years. That's very effective because the first 2 years or so is learning the system. And then once they get into it, but the other thing I would say is nobody ever wants off. And if you come and do some site visits with us, you'll find out why.
Do you have a follow-up?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, I guess we'll carry on.
Okay. Next. So this is where the application process, and I think this will be instructive in our next conversation. It's available online. It's a interactive application form. You can fill it out, submit it online. It has to be sponsored by a governmental agency or nonprofit. That's in the bill draft that you have. That's a constitutional requirement. We take submissions all year round. Early on, all the submissions came in on the day before they were due, which was interesting. Our office was in Riverton, and people were absolutely uncertain what we did anyway. And then on the last day of February, you would have a line of FedEx, UPS, Post Office, DSL, trucks carrying these boxes of applications in. And people, they'd come across the street and go, "What do you do?" And, I had a lot of good answers for them, but that is done now year round, and it's done electronically. We do design assistance. We'll get somebody who'll come in with a project. In fact, I'm working with an entity right now. They've never done it. They aren't sure what to do. We'll tell them, send us your application. We'll go through it for you and help you with what might be missing or things that you could do and make it a stronger application. That leans toward the idea that as a granting entity, our goal is to get the grant on the ground. If it's a good idea and somebody brings it forward, you don't want it to go away because of a technical error or because their math didn't add up. You want to be able in a position to say, hey, you're short here. You forgot you need to get this permit or you have to do this survey. Let's get that done. Maybe we'll defer the application and deal with it in 6 months. But the idea is to try and get to yes, because these are good projects. We do them twice a year. That's another unique thing about the program. Most granting entities only grant once a year. So if you miss out because your math isn't right or you forgot to put something in it, you're a year down the road. You think about that. If you're doing an ecological project, your idea comes from one point. You have to wait for one period to apply. You don't get it. You're another year away to applying again. It can be 3 years from the time that you have a germ of an idea to you actually implement it on the ground. We think that's nonsense. And so what we try to do is say, okay, if you come in the June period and it isn't quite right, defer it. We had 3 of those that the board met this week, and they corrected those. They were granted this week. So it's very nimble program, and I think that's one of the things you want to have with a granting entity is not be clunky and hard to deal with. Go ahead. The initial process, we get all of these in April and October. We use a 100-point scorecard. I'll show that to you. Most of the time, after you've done it a year or 2, you don't need to go through the scorecard. People will use it as a gut check sometimes on a project they're not sure about. And it's, again, an interactive. If you enter the number, if you follow it, we'll look at it. It just adds it up, and at the end, you have a score. So you can kind of see relatively where it fits with others. But all of the board members read every project application, and they rank it a 1, a 2, or a 3. A 1 is the best, a 3 is the worst. That aggregate score then puts them in order when we go through them in April and October in order of highest preference based on the application. That's all well and good, but the best part of this is the site visits, which is next. That's the scorecard. It's way too tiny a print to see, but it's in your handout. And if you want an actual scorecard to play around with, I'll get one to you. Next. So then the site visits. This is the key to this program. It's what makes it work, is that you get out on the ground with people, you go through their numbers, you go through their design, you stand there with their engineers, you go through all of that on the ground. This particular one that's shown here was a bark beetle treatment. that we did up in northeast corner of the state. Basically, it's a show and tell, and then you can go out and see, this is what we're gonna do, this is how many trees we're gonna cut, this is where we're doing it. Here's the science behind what we do. Next. They're not, go ahead, Ed. They're not necessarily a friendly thing. We'll do site visits in every county. This is one in Sublette County, which is a fish passage project. Yes, the wind is blowing about 30 miles an hour, and that's in November. So they're not all fun and games, but next. They're pretty intensive. That's one thing I think most of our partners will tell you is they get right down in the weeds. And so the board, and generally myself and a board member, we're down into their budgets, we're down into what it costs, you know, relative to, so and we talked about the value of having people serve on the board for a continued period of time. If they've seen 20 prescribed fires and they know what that range of price of the application is, and somebody comes in with an application rate, dollar rate that is way low or way high, we're digging into that. You know, why are you double the price of what we just paid for an aerial application in one place or another? And there sometimes are reasons. We did one on the North Fork, Madam Chair. The terrain is the reason. So, you know, your helicopter, your cost is going to be different than it is if you're doing it in the Thunder Basin. That's fine, as long as you can explain it. The ones that, interestingly, are more a red flag than others are those that come in lowball pricing, because that project is not going to get done. And so the board will go in and really bore into that and say, you know, you're at 50% of what we're paying right across the road for this. Where are you getting that reduced cost? And most of the time they'll come back and say, you know, we really wanted to get the bid. And then the expectation was that they would come in and say, oop, our price is different. Well, once we do the grant, it's done. It's a contract. We're not going to come back and give you more because you messed up. So we want to do that in that site visit process. Next. Some of them are, I mean, this was a site visit we did. There was about 30 people on that site visit. You see Speaker Summers there on the left. We did one in DuBois. It'll be fun because we'll be back up there next week. Don Schramm and I went up to do a site visit for a pond, wetland. There were 30 people that came to the site visit in DuBois. The entire town council, the mayor, the fire chief. We had a lot of interested parties and the sponsors. And that's great because it shows you the vesting that people put in it from the community level. And it's, I just got a text from them yesterday. It said that that is the #1 destination now in DuBois. It's everything from people fishing, paddleboarding. They've got over 80 species of birds they've documented on it. It's right in town. And it's pretty impressive. So next. The grant awards are done twice a year, as I said. One thing people don't realize, when people think about grants, normally they think, I put in for the grant, I get it, you send me a check, I do it and I report back. We do not do that. It's actually a contract for services. So you get the award, you're selected, we write a contract that spells out what you will do in order to get paid, and then you bill with invoices after the project is completed. That protects the state from any kind of slippage. Basically, the project has to be done. Just had one come in this week where they sent the invoice, they didn't send the backup information, they didn't send the maps. I said, you know what, we'll pay it when we get that. So then they came back with all of that detail, and that's how we do it. Large projects are those with 400,000 or more from the trust, and those require legislative approval. It's just interesting, a large project that is funded will be reviewed 18 times before we write the contract. That's from the initial application to the site visit, to the select committee, to all of the readings in the House and Senate, the auditor, the governor's office. So there's a lot of public involvement, there's a lot of review and a lot of openness. Next. The selection criteria, I'll go through these quick. Habitat and natural resource value is the big one, 40%. Next is cooperation partnership, 20%. The more of that we have, the better. Again, that vests you in it. Next. Financing and permitting. Are there matching funds? Do you have the funding in hand? Do you have your permits that you need to have? Is the project ready? Shovel ready was a term that they used to use. Okay, yeah, is it ready to go? Because we don't want to grant money, tie it up, and have you wait 2 years to implement that on the ground. We want to know when that contract is signed in June, that you're ready to go. If it's a seasonal project, you're ready to go in September. And so we're turning dirt as quick as we can. That processes money through the system, and it doesn't tie it up with a bunch of encumbrances. And that's something that we've been able to really focus on as we move forward, is getting that money out the door, getting the projects done. Next. Feasibility and longevity is the other. And the one thing there that you see underlined is that economic integrity. So again, if you're able to join us next week, you'll see that Long Creek project, which is a forest health project. One of the things we demanded in that of the Forest Service and of Game and Fish was that the lumber, the timber be salvaged. It's good timber. And they did that. So it's a joint project now between a logging company that's actually able to process that timber with an ecological objective to remove some of the stuff that's encroaching on aspen. So you're getting multiple benefits, including driving that economic engine in the state, whether that's conservation, agriculture, forestry, or whatever it is, that you're thinking all the time about how do we keep investing back in our communities? And that's an important piece of that one. Next. Successful applications, I think you know what they are. They're the ones that basically you get them on the ground and they're sustainable over time. We don't do things like education. We don't do that. We do some research. The research has to apply to an on-the-ground solution. So an example of that, on the Wyoming range, research on diet of deer post-fire led us to the ability to say, this is the type of treatment that will actually enhance what that deer population is, because this is what they're seeking out in order to be fat going into winter. Next. Flexibility, I've talked about that. Next.
Just a
Yes.
question from Representative Western.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Budd, for example, the example you mentioned about some of those coniferous trees encroaching on some of those aspen stands, what is kind of the biological scientific review process? Obviously, you're kind of walking us through partnerships and impact applications and some of that stuff, but do you consult with some of the biologists at University of Wyoming or Game and Fish when you say, hey, we've got this application coming in? Is its objective kind of aligning with what we think are best practices from a biological management perspective, or what's that process like for you guys?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Western, that's all done ahead of time. If you bring an application in and you're just spitballing and throwing it at the wall, it ain't going anywhere. So when they come in, there are letters of reference, letters of support from everything. So like Long Creek, we had letters of support from Game and Fish as it related to bighorn sheep habitat, as it related to elk habitat, as it related to deer. We had letters of support from the private landowners involved. We had letters of support from the Forest Service that outlined what the ecological objectives were and what the problem was with those invasive species. So there is a whole litany, and if you look at the application form, I sent it to you, there's a section in there to talk about all of those interactions. That's filled out, sometimes ad nauseum. We have to go back to some of them and say, no, you really don't have this tropical species there, you just kind of threw something at it. But that's all in the application. Then when you get to the site visit, you're actually on site looking at it and saying, okay, if you're going to take, as an example, we did one on South Pass, they were removing limber pine but not removing Doug fir. Why are you not removing Doug fir if the idea is that you're trying to enhance aspen? The answer comes back, we want to retain some of that big Doug fir for diversity purposes, but we may take out the smaller Doug fir to create the mosaic that we want. That's all a part of the application process and the site visit process.
A follow-up? Okay. All right. I guess we'll carry on.
Where are we? We've had 1,400 applications with over 1,000 grants. It's $120 million that the program has put on the ground. That total value of those projects, with all the other inputs, all the other partners, is $868 million returned to the state. We have projects in every county, and we have over 140 sponsoring organizations. Next. Types of projects, river restoration and fish passage is number 1 right now. Rangeland enhancements and conservation easements would be number 2 in terms of numbers. We have wetlands, invasive species. That one is continually rising, particularly now that we have Rejuvra on cheatgrass, and we think we'll get that approved on BLM lands this year. That will be a game changer. Aspen enhancement, fence modification, research and inventory, and then other will also increase because that's where we have highway crossings and our migration stuff. So there's a considerable amount of money to go in there. From a dollar perspective, it's going to rise a lot. Project numbers, it won't alter that very much. But this will change over time. If you go to the next one, this gives you a little idea how things ebb and flow. So these are all the different types of projects, that spaghetti up there. Some of them are relatively stable. Conservation easements, there's about a certain number a year you go through. There's a peak in there that was during sage grouse years when we had a huge amount of money that came into the state to do easements, so we had the ability to match more. But generally, you'll see that the river projects, if you look at that up and down, that depends a lot on external funding, how much other funding is out there. Next. Again, just showing projects, the types by percentage. Next. Next. And next one. The economic impacts, this was a study the University of Wyoming did. We generate $315,000 in the economy direct for every 100,000 that's spent. That's 34.4 job months per $100,000. It's 2.9 permanent jobs in the state, and there's a $4 gain for each dollar invested. That's direct, not indirect. So if you put multipliers and things on there, you can see the impact. Next. Our key partners are conservation districts, state agencies, primarily game and fish, nonprofits, federal agencies, land trusts, and local government. Next. And then just let's quickly go through these. This is Aspen enhancement. That's one of the types of projects. The next is conservation easements. And I'm happy to answer any questions about any of these, but let's, in the interest of time, just scroll through them, Heather. Next. Next. Water development. Next. Invasives. This is kind of a fun one. This is up at Lovell, Yellowtail. The before picture and the after picture, it's phenomenal what you can do if you start removing things like salt cedar, if you treat Russian olive, if you treat invasive conifers. This one, that skid steer you see right there had a cutter on the front end, and as it went out into this area and was removing it, it suddenly realized that historically was a wetland, which is what it should be. And the skid steer started sinking into the mud, and they had to get all the chains they could find in Bighorn County and borrow a few from Park County and use an excavator from the road to suck it back out of the swamp, because the water table came up so quickly that it went back to what its natural potential was, which is a wetland. And we had another one similar to that with invasives where they were removing conifer on the backside of Muddy Mountain near Casper. And the landowner, who had been on the place for 60 years, came up, and the crew was having lunch by this pretty little creek. And they said, "What do you call this creek?" And he said, "I don't know. I've lived here 60 years and I've never seen it run water." That was in a matter of days. So pretty cool stuff. Next. Rangeland enhancements, obviously sage grouse is a priority now, mule deer as well. That's primarily where you see these go. Next. River restoration, that says more than 1,000 miles of stream reconnected. That's now actually approaching 5,000 miles. That's particularly important if you look at the Endangered Species Act and the continual pressure to look at listing things like cutthroat trout in all of their different 4 varieties. Bonneville is one in particular that's been important. We actually helped recreate a stream in Lincoln County that had not been able to reach the river in probably 5 decades. The landowner said, "I'm okay, put it back." And that now, the 1 year, that was done in the fall. The next spring at the migration of those fish up to their spawning areas, they were back in it in Grade Creek. So they went clear back up to the top and spawned and came back into the Bear River. So pretty impressive stuff. Next. Wetlands. If you haven't had a chance to see the Muddy Creek wetlands down in Senator Hicks' district, I'd encourage you to go do that sometime. That's now over 1,200 acres of wetlands in the middle of the desert. And the number of birds, and it's just unbelievable to see things that people don't even realize exist in Wyoming. Next.
Madam
And-
Chairman,
Representative Burkhart.
Bob, that's also in my district now.
Thank you for that clarification, Senator Representative.
And then
Okay,
other,
Bob.
you can see what that is. So next. In summary, I've already given you that. We get $6.28 in matching funds for every dollar we spend. That's money coming back into our local communities. Next. And there's the update overview of the program. So I would be happy, Madam Chair, to answer any questions.
Any questions? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Biggest question I have, I think, to lead us in, I think you've done so much with this trust fund that it just really, I think, will help springboard what we're trying to do with the outdoor fund. But my question, I guess, would be, what type of cooperation have you had from your federal partners, particularly BLM and Forest Service and that sort of thing? I realize that county governments are usually pretty easy to work with, but what about our federal partners?
Director Bud.
Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair, that's a great question. And my answer is going to wander a bit because it's so highly dependent on who is in that local office. As an example, a shout out, Andy Warren, who was in the Rollins BLM office for years, great friend of mine, just flat got it. I mean, the guy, he knew every landowner. He was out on the ground all the time. Representative Burkhart, you know Andy. And he was on it. So there were 2 or 3 applications every year coming in from Rollins. When Andy retired, there weren't any. There are others down there now that are picking up that slack. So it's highly dependent on what's going on. Secondly, it's highly dependent on their workload and what they're being told that they need to do. So a lot of times, this kind of work falls to the bottom of the list if they're having to go through and update allotment management plans, if they're having to deal with an RMP amendment, if they're having to do those things. But we've got, I would say, very good participation from all of the federal agencies. We have a lot of the matching money here comes from NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. They're a partner with us. Those are usually sponsored by a different entity. Conservation District, for instance, goes out, aggregates all of those different funding sources together, and then they are the applicant. We've also encouraged that because the accounting system with the federal government is an absolute nightmare, and particularly with the Forest Service. They process their bills out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. There's no connection to the project on the ground. They send a bill, they send a dunning notice. I'm waiting for the report from the guy in the field. He's in the field, so he hasn't got the report. There are things there that are clunky. So a lot of times what we'll do is say, why don't we run this through the Conservation District or through an NGO, and they'll pick that up, and then they're the project sponsor. They can bill us effectively, we get them paid, then they can pay it back to the pass-through. But it's highly variable, and it depends. We've done them with every BLM office in the state. I think we've done projects. I think we've done them with every forest in the state. It just it's like that spaghetti map of projects. That's a little bit what the federal partners looks like.
Follow up. Any other questions? All right. Representative Storr.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Bud, I'm curious just to explore the question of one-time funding or short-term versus longer-term strategies. Some discussion in your report there about the fact that you tend to go for something that you can see the beginning and the end of, but especially as we think about these invasive species treatments, should we be thinking more long-term and more sustained, and is that necessary?
Director Bud.
Madam Chair, Representative Storr, a good question. Let me go back to the genesis of that statement and why we did that. The first applications we got were all little one-offs. And then Treasurer Lummis said, beware, because what normally happens with a lot of these applicants is they come in and say, well, we're in phase one of this project and it's $100,000 and you fund phase one. And then 3 years later, they come back and say, oh, well, we're in phase two and it's $500,000. And you say, oh, okay, well, we're already vested in phase one, so now we're in for $600,000. Then the whammy comes in phase three and it's $7 million. And there's a certain amount of that I understand takes time, but there's also a certain disingenuity to that if you're not able to tell us what the scope of the project is at the outset or what you think it is, then the board can't make a qualified decision. They can't bind future boards necessarily, right? So what you have is we will go to a degree, and I'll give you an example that near and dear to you, the Encampment River. We got 3 projects. They were all small. They were all good. The next year they came back with another. And so we told the applicant, we want a watershed plan. When we get the full watershed plan, then we'll start funding projects. They came back with a watershed plan that was about $7 million. The board funded $1.5 million of that in 1 year for 3 projects, but they know that there are others going to come down the line, so they can mentally prepare for that. In other cases, we'd have invasives being an example. Somebody comes in and says, we're going to treat all of the private and state lands and forest because we can use Rejuvra. BLM is still out there. Well, how many acres of BLM are out there and what's your application cost? Then we know, okay, down the road, we're going to have that one. The board might fund that entire project at one time and say, okay, this is $1 million that's going to be allocated over 3 years, and you're going to do private state first year, forest second year, and then BLM third year. So that all of those different variables are factored into every project that a grant is given for. And generally, what we want to know is what is the scope of it. A good example of that is the stuff that's been done on the Laramie Range, where we started with one project on the backside of Muddy Mountain out here. That now extends clear past Douglas down into almost to the stuff at Iron Mountain. But we knew what it was going to look like. And then the board can mentally figure, okay, at 20 years, it's going to cost $100,000 to $200,000 a year to do that, and they can incrementally move that project across the landscape.
Follow up? Anyone else? Okay. Oh, Representative Burkhardt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So Bob, just out of curiosity, I won't make the trip next week. I've been traveling so much every day at home is like Christmas. But what part of Long Creek?
Director Bud.
I'm just curious. More than
Madam Chair, so it's that whole face of Long Creek up there. And if you go in off the highway, you know where that is, then come back to the east and south, out to the due north. That's all of that face across there that has been aspen historically. That's all being treated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
One of my more favorite spots in the state.
Oh, you ought to see it now. Oh, it's great. It's amazing.
Any other questions for Director Bud? Senator Grew.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Bud, when you do a project on BLM ground, as far as access goes, there's no way that you can or your board can change the access rules that the BLM has for that ground. So you have to follow the federal guidelines that they lay down, correct?
Director.
Madam Chair, that's correct, Senator.
And if I can follow
Follow
up, and on state ground, whether it's, depending on what ground we're talking about, you too have to follow OSLI and their rule package for those grounds as well.
Madam
correct?
Chair, that's correct.
Then on the third piece, you do something on private ground, and you have to work with the private landowner to, whatever level they're comfortable with allowing access to. So if they say no access at all, then your board has to decide, are we going to do this or not, depending on those criteria that they lay down, correct?
Madam Chair, that is also correct.
So that's just kind of how your board knows that as you go through each of those projects. And so there isn't any necessarily criteria that you lay down about access beforehand, because you're going to have to play the cards that are dealt as they come.
Madam Chair, Senator Drew, that's correct, because I think we would be very close to violating the statute if we started to dictate terms like that. It does factor into whether or not a project gets funded. And, you know, the board will look at that and say, you know, if as an example, if you want to do a project and you're blocking access to a considerable area, the board's going to look at that pretty carefully and say, well, what is the benefit? Where is a public benefit? You know, where do we get something out of that? And those are conversations that are had on the ground. They're conversations that are had in the board meeting. And, you know, that's just a part of the criteria. And it's on the form, the 100-point sheet that's on there as a benefit.
Senator?
If I can ask another question?
Yes.
Okay, different topic. Your process is very rigorous, and I'm looking at the acting director over here. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here, but I'm just trying to draw a distinction. The process that you go through is, you know, and you laid it out very well. It goes through. We were talking a little bit earlier in the director's report about Sinks Canyon, and it was a little controversial project, and now it's kind of off the table for another reason on cost. But given the templates you're laying that you have to go through, you think that, and you're aware of that project, kind of what went down. Where do you think those trip points might have come if they'd have had your template?
Director?
Madam Chair, Senator, I think if we got a project like that, the first thing you're going to do is look at the sponsorship. And generally, and we had one similar to that several years ago, where all of a sudden you're starting to hear from people in that process that maybe this project isn't quite as agreeable to everybody as you thought. That's a hard stop for my board, not to stop the project, but to stop and say, maybe we better hear more about this. We would probably, on the site visit, we'd make sure we heard from both sides. The meetings that, when all these decisions and when the discussion takes place are all public. So there's an opportunity, and we've had that happen, where the public comes to our meeting, and we just had one this week, and Ms. Cheeseborough with the Wild Sheep Foundation came, spoke up about some of the work they're doing. We love to hear that. But I think there's enough rigor to the process that there are multiple places to on-ramp and come in and say, hold on, we've got this concern. We have that ecologically. Back to Representative Western's question earlier, somebody come in and say, hold it, you know, there may be something here that you're not contemplating, the Doug Fir piece. That process over 6 months, there's a lot of time to ponder that and get that information. Ultimately, if a project has that much consternation, probably we're going to pause that, hit the pause button until it gets sorted out. But I think the two things there are time and transparency that we have that really help not have that happen.
Thank you,
Do
Director.
you have a follow-up? Representative Byron?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Director Budd, we're talking a lot about public access, and you've mentioned there are projects that obviously ultimately the landowner does not potentially grant that access. But can you speak to the effect of what the scientific and habitat enhancements and potential gains that these projects on private lands still greatly benefit the public? I mean, whether or not it's a migration corridor or some of the stuff with the aspen stands or any of this, you know, some of the invasive species stuff. But I just think it's important for the community to hear, even though we may not be able to walk on that piece of land, potentially when that fish spawns on that piece of land or that elk calves on that piece of land, you know, can you speak to how great that is for the rest of the public that once that species potentially migrates off that piece of land?
Director?
Madam Chair, Representative Byron, I think you did a pretty good job of describing it right there. You have to look, all of these projects are taken in the context of an ecosystem or a large landscape. Wyoming is unique in the sense that most of our species are landscape species. That means that they use all different types of habitats Sage grouse are a good example. Mule deer are a good example. Neotropical migrant songbirds are a good example. They need a lot of different habitats. Even just one species will use those. So take sage grouse, they're going to strut on bare ground, basically in an area that's acoustically attractive. Then they're going to go nest in dense sagebrush. When the chicks hatch, they're going to go seek out areas where you've got insects and forbs, which is disturbed areas as they're young. Then as you get in later season, they're going to go down along the creeks into those mesic areas that have a lot of grass and stay green. And come winter, they're going to go up on a ridge and live on sagebrush, and that's it. So that range can be huge. And that's what most of our species are like in this state. So if you have a key piece, think of a stopover area on the migration route, you have that key piece, whether or not public access is given to that, the deer don't care. What the deer care is that they can stop there for 2 weeks, fatten up before they get onto their winter range so that they have twins come spring. There's an ecological function that drives us more than a social function of allowing access. Do we want more access? Yeah, in some places we do, and that's where the board is invested in that. But access doesn't drive the decisions. Ecology drives the decisions.
Do you have a follow-up, Representative? No. Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Since my distinguished colleague from the northwest part of the state said the word access, I figured I'd tack on. I certainly agree there's a great deal of value in ensuring that we have really high-quality forage and high-quality habitat, whether it be for sage grouse or mule deer. But as a sportsman, there's certainly value in knowing that mule deer herds are healthy, but it stops at the inability to access them and to engage in that sporting activity and hunting. So my question is, I asked you earlier about the access component. How many of your conservation units do come with some type of access component? Maybe limited in scope and nature, but how many of them have some type of access component to them?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Western, I would say virtually all of them. There are very few that don't allow access for different purposes. I could go back, I'd have to go through each of them. A lot of them allow fishing. A lot of them allow hunting in limited numbers. They don't allow unfettered access without permission, but they allow access with permission. I don't know. I mean, I can think of a handful that might not, but I think virtually all of them allow some level of access.
You have a follow-up, Representative?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Budd, so for example, did the Kane conservation easement that went through this past year in Sheridan County, did that have any hunting access components with that easement?
Director Budd.
Madam Chair, Representative Western, not from our end because we can't require public access. So that would be entirely up to the family. If they decide that they want to allow you to hunt, great. If they decide they don't want you to hunt, but they want Chairman Schuler to hunt, there's access. And again, almost all of them allow some level of access. I've hunted on canes in the past, pheasants. And I think, I'm guessing if it's whitetails, they're probably access. If you want to go hunt mule deer, it might not be. Again, and just my experience when I ran Red Canyon, we did not allow mule deer hunting. We allowed anybody to hunt whitetails, provided there was one party in each area per day, so that we were regulating that experience and the ability to hunt and be successful. So there's 100 levels of access that you have to contemplate. Too much is not good. None is probably not good either. But there are areas where none is the ideal. Stopover areas being an example. If we're trying to fatten deer up, we don't need ATVs, snowmobiles, whatever going through that area. And that's when you do the site visit, those are the questions that you ask. That's when you sit down and look at it and say, what is the benefit to the species? What is it we're trying to accomplish? And it's very different if it's a winter range, or if it's a calving area, or if it's an area where you're trying to get fish access. Another good example, if somebody wanted to fish in an area that's juvenile rearing area, no. You're trying to get those fish big enough to be caught down below. So all of that, all those levels play into how we evaluate a project.
Follow-up, okay. Anybody else? Representative Burkhardt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So Bob, I think the project I was with you on over in Saratoga, I think that's a good example where access obviously was not any criteria because that was last unobstructed migration route out of the Snowies, which in its own right needed to be protected and enhanced. And would that be a good example where the ecology was the complete driving factor on that?
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhardt, that's a prime example in a different part of the state than I was originally referring to, but that is a stopover area. It's a staging area for those deer. They come in, and if you'll recall that day, there was probably 300 deer there. And I mean, the entire area, those deer will stay for 3 weeks, a month, as long as they can stay before the snow forces them out. And what we've found is that's absolutely crucial to their ability to have fawns the next spring. If you look at Dr. Monteith's research, which the board helped fund, that's one of the things that we found. The fatter those does are going into winter, the better chance you have of healthy fawns in the spring. So that would be an area, absolutely. The last thing you need is a bunch of human activity causing those deer to disperse and not use that high quality browse that they're seeking there.
Follow up? Okay, any other questions? Okay, I think that we're done with you temporarily.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're almost a little bit ahead, so maybe a 5-minute break. Okay, next thing on our agenda is the Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund legislation. If we could have Director Bud and Director Glenn and whatever support staff you might want up at the table, that would be awesome. And we'll rely on Lucas as well. So I guess maybe the way to proceed is just to dig into the legislation. And Lucas, if you want to come up and kind of go through that, and I would encourage the committee to ask questions as we go along. And then we'll carry on with that. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to go backwards at the help. I'm grateful to my committee member, Representative Burkhart, to point out that we did not take public comment on the State Parks report or the Natural Resource report. And so if there's any public comment on either of those, if you would like to come up and comment. I saw movement, but not movement forward. Okay. Okay, so seeing none, we'll just carry on. And thank you for that reminder, Representative.
Madam Chairman, this discussion, if I might ask a question right off the bat.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thank you, Madam Chairman. So how much of this bill is patterned after the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund legislation? I wasn't here for the last meeting. I apologize for that, but I'm just curious as how much we patterned it after that legislation. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel.
Luke.
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, Luke Plum, LSO. This was primarily based on that. There's been several changes kind of considering the legislation that was introduced last year. So it's not exactly the same, but the basic structure is modeled after the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust.
Thanks, Luke.
Do you have a follow-up? No, okay. Any other questions before we start? Senator Ellis.
Madam Chair, do you want us to ask questions of Luke as we go, or would you rather maybe him present the whole bill and then we walk through it? I'm just
Well,
wanting to-
it's such a long bill. I would prefer we do it as we go,
Okay.
I guess.
As we go.
Yeah. I think, Luke, do you have a preference?
I have no preference, whatever the committee would like.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
All right. So if you want to kick that off, that'd be great.
All right, well, this is 24 LSO-0033. It is the Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Trust Fund Administration. I was thinking, unless the chairs decide otherwise, that we might start kind of as we did last time and start with the kind of from the beginning of the statutory provisions. You know, once again, as LSO drafting convention dictates, is that we put created sections first and then amended, so the amended sections are actually the first ones. So you should have there was at every place, there should have been a copy of the bill draft. And so I'll actually be starting on page 11, if everybody wants to flip there.
I think that's a great idea. So we'll carry on from there.
Excellent. So at the top of page 11, where it says section 2, these are just all the statutes that are going to be amended. The very first one is 2811-401. This is the statutory provisions for the Select Natural Resource Funding Committee. And what is happening here is that the Select Committee is being given oversight of the trust fund, similar to that for the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. So throughout on page 11 and through most of page 12 is just conforming amendments. It's basically the same language that we use for the Natural Resource Trust to be now for this Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Trust Fund. And so I'll kind of skip through that. Oh, go ahead.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Burkhart.
So Luke, and for everyone, I'm on page 12. The first deletion, line 7, the board, and it says either or both boards may hold joint meetings. Does this confuse the issue between the two boards? Because I guess you could say their missions might be a little different at times. So if we have a meeting where we have the select committee and then both boards at the same meetings, does that dilute either board's mission or information?
Luke.
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, my thought here is, so it does, you have to provide the select committee with notice of their meetings. This was more on the lines of, the select committee generally, at least currently how it operates with the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust, is that there's a meeting that goes between the two, but the select committee has an opportunity to meet with the board, and then in December, there's a chance to actually provide that legislation. I was only thinking that it might be, efficient, I guess, maybe that if both boards wanted to show up and say, here's our bill that needs to be approved by the select committee.
Director Bud, you had a comment.
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, and I'll defer to Senator Guru, who sits on that select committee, but this was actually my suggestion. The workload for that committee is not great. Probably it's a matter of when the meeting, the one summer meeting is a tour, we could combine those things. I was looking for efficiency when I suggested it. I think that it's very productive, actually, that if we're going to have, there will be areas where we have a disagreement on whether or not there should be that much recreational activity, depending on what the wildlife or ecological values are. And Director Glenn and I have had those back and forth already. I think having that in a room together is far healthier than each pursuing it separately. And having a select committee that can hear both of those, sort that out, come up with solutions is a right way to do it. So it was my suggestion based on workload, based on the similarity of mission, but particularly based on the similarity of statute and how the boards would function. I think it made sense that all be done together. But I would certainly defer to Senator Guru.
You have a follow-up? Representative Burkhart? No. Okay, Senator Guru, do you have a comment?
Just, Madam Chair, thank you. Just to follow up on Director Bud's comment, on the Natural Resource Funding Board, on the Select Committee, we know that, the rigorous process that they go through to get to the point where it comes before us. And so, and it's also easier for me, I'll be honest, because the new chairman of the committee, Steve Meadows, is a friend of mine and B, someone who I have a heck of a lot of respect for. And so usually about the week before the meeting, I call him and say, you okay with this? And he says, yeah. And then I go, okay. And that's about, then I know, where I need to be. Now, but I'll give you another example, and it's going to happen next week. So I'll give you a preview of coming attractions. I'm going to have a hard time voting next week for projects in counties where in the Senate, the members of the Senate voted against funding projects in their own counties because they just don't, they just have a philosophical problem with spending money. And so my feeling is, I'm going to have a hard time doing that, but that's a political consideration at the end of the day that has nothing to do with what the board's doing to that point. I'm not saying I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to say I'll be talking about that, So, but that's only one little sidelight on that. But one of the great things about this template is that the board goes through it and does that rigorous, right, which is what I was talking about with the some of the challenges that we had with Sings Canyon. But then to be able to have that more rigorous process and then have the political component at the end and have the opportunity to have both processes right there, I think is going to make a better project and would be more helpful and to avoid, I know that the department or Parks Department didn't seek out to, upset a big swath of folks in Fremont County going in. They thought they were doing a great job and they were, but it just turned out differently. But this process, I think, ferrets that out at an earlier stage. And that's one of the key reasons why I think this is a good product.
Any other comments?
Madam Chair.
Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it just reads a little clunky. I think maybe a better attempt just as we get to it when we start working the bill, but I think it's the select committee with notice, or the select committee may hold joint meetings with either or both boards, I think might just read better. Then it kind of puts it in the select committee's hands instead of saying either or both may jointly. So maybe that helps Representative Burkhart a little bit. So the select committee maybe in the future could, but they're the ones making the decision on when to meet.
All right. Did we note that, Heather?
I'm on it.
Okay. All right, then moving on, Luke.
Excellent. So yeah, so kind of just staying on page 12, like I said, it's just for the Select Natural Resource Funding Committee, they have to review the budgets of the projects from both of these boards. They can hold joint meetings, and then their primary would be to review the project grant applications, and then they would be funding legislation for any large projects. And so moving on to 364202 at the bottom of page 12, this is kind of the start of where the actual trust fund, the Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Trust Fund statutory provisions really begin. This is an update to the definitions, which includes the board, which would be the trust account board for the Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Trust. We have the income account, and then we also have a large project.
Representative Larson.
So on the, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So on the large project, we just went through last session and updated all these large projects for the Natural Trust Fund to $400,000 cap. Was there any discussion on that? Are these projects going to be less expensive by nature per project? And is that $200,000 something that was thought out when we wrote the bill? So,
Luke.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, yes, the bill was at 400,000, and then we had the working group meeting after the last meeting on this bill draft, and it was decided, maybe it'd be better to knock it down to 200,000 at least initially for these projects.
Did a follow-up, Representative? No. Anybody else? Okay, we'll carry on then.
Excellent. The next definition is outdoor recreation infrastructure. This one was changed slightly. It's the physical facilities and structure that support recreational activities and experiences, including, and then we said in there, but not limited to, and then it provides trails, campgrounds, picnic areas, et cetera, for those. The select committee is the Select Natural Resource Funding Committee. A small project is any that is under $200,000.
Madam Chairman,
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So back to Romanet 4, I don't know, we use the term experiences a lot in this draft. Can we quantify experiences? I think I would just delete it. I think I'd probably delete most of everything after recreational activities instead of trying to define them all. I mean, wildlife viewing areas, I know a lot of us at times have told tourists that those snow fences they see are actually wildlife viewing stands. So I would suggest, depending on the committees, that on line 12, we put a period after activities and just leave it at that. I don't know how the committee feels about that. I know we're discussing the draft and not really a working bill, so.
Fine. Any other comments?
Madam Co-Chair,
Alice.
I think that the point is taken. I think, for us, our discussion is when we're presenting this bill to our chambers, that they understand what exactly this money will go toward, so that it's not a free-for-all and it gives them at least some kind of parameter of how these dollars will be used. I'd note that on line 13, we have that word visitors. I think what we're trying to say, though, is for residents and non-residents. That was one issue we talked about as well. But that's why we have that language in there. So we can make a choice as we work the bill, but that's why the language is there.
I'm just going to spent 15 years on our recreation board, and we had a group come that wanted us to fund the community concerts, because for that sector of maybe older people, that was their recreation, going to these community concerts. And so, but I don't think that might be a thing that we'd want to fund here. Right. And so I think by listing these things, it kind of narrows in to what the intent is.
Okay. Just questions.
And good ones.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay.
Madam Chair. Yes, I would just like to note, Senator Ellis, yes, I did also notice that visitors, and that was intended to be changed to non-residents. I think that was the general concept for this, was to change it to residents and non-residents throughout, and I just must have missed that one. So once again, the small committee, or the select committee, and then a small project. So yes, once again, the difference is a large project is anything over $200,000, a small project is anything under $200,000. And then the trust account in this act were already defined; they were just renumbered in this bill draft. And so then we get into 364203, and this is where the Tourism Trust Fund account is created. There's one change that was discussed at the last meeting to say that the funds within the trust account are intended to be inviolate and constitute a perpetual trust fund. But it does just create that account, says that any monies collected from federal grants and other contributions shall be set in there, and that it is specifically empowered to accept those grants and gifts.
Representative
Madam Chair.
Burkhart.
So I apologize for all the questions, but I think it's really, from my understanding, we've deleted the word on line 21, page 14, deleted the word shall and inserted are intended to be inviolate. Now, really, inviolate is a loose term that we can do away with anytime we want, literally. But was there a specific reason why we changed that language? I'm just curious.
Luke.
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart. It's just a general trend that LSO and that's just kind of been considered as, you kind of, as you said, right, the term inviolate and shall is not necessarily set in stone, can't be changed, but it is the idea of trying to avoid binding future legislatures.
Okay, thank you.
And do not apologize for asking questions. Thank you. Okay, we'll carry on.
Okay. Moving on to page 15, subsection B. This is where the trust fund income account is created. And so this is where the state treasurer shall credit annually to this account all earnings from the funds in both the income account and in the trust account. So that's just the general rule. And then also, but then on line 9, it says until the earlier of July 1st or when of 2026, or when the corpus of the trust account equals or exceeds $200 million, all earnings from the trust account and income account should be credited to the trust account. The purpose behind that is to just, initially build up that trust account in the corpus there. And so the legislature, of course, can appropriate funds directly to either account, but any funds that appropriated funds without a designation will be credited to the income account.
Co-chair or Madam Chair?
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Luke. On page line 13, do we need the language from time to time?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, I don't know if it's really required, right? I think it's just, that's some language that's been carried over from other statutes. Up to the committee on that. So then on the
Senator
bottom.
Ellis, anything else? Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Subsection C is that any person may, grant, give, transfer, bequest, or donate funds to the trust fund account or the income account, and they can specify where that money should go if they choose to give funds.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And please forgive me if I don't recall everything that went down during session. But on line 9 right there, it says until the earlier of July 1st, 2026, or when the corpus of the trust account deal exceeds $200 million. Do we need to push that date back or by when will it hit that $200 million threshold? I don't know if Ms. Schober can refresh my memory, but what is that amount generated every year from that lodging tax?
Director Schober. Pull a chair up. Yeah, well, okay. But you don't get your own microphone. Dave will be in charge of your microphone.
Madam Chairman, Representative Western, members of the committee, I'm Diane Schober. I'm the Executive Director at the Wyoming Office of Tourism. And the designated funding to start this is through the Wyoming Project and Tourism Reserve account, of which $6 million would come on a biennium. And so at $6 million per biennium, how many years does that take from the math to get there?
Many.
Yeah. So that's the timing. Based on, but that's only if that were the only source of funding. Correct. I mean, there's obviously other avenues for funding to raise funds into that account. So that would be only one source of funding for this particular trust.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I guess, so then the policy decision for the committee is, do we want to push that date back to allow that corpus to grow more? Because obviously it's not going to get there by 2026.
Well, that's the policy decision, is do we want to be able to spend money out of this fund to get projects on the ground before it reaches 200 million, which is what happened with the Natural Resource Trust Fund. Director Budd.
Madam Chair, I think it may be helpful. The the original investment in the WWNRT was $15 million in the corpus of the trust. There were other funds that were allocated for projects into the income account. The philosophy at that time, and I would encourage the same carry forward here, was in order for people to see what the program does, you have to have something that you can put on the ground. What I viewed this, and when we talked about this was to assure that that corpus started building up to where it actually would generate significant enough funding that you could do meaningful projects on the ground. And as Director Schober has said, there are other avenues that may help fund it. We have had several $1 million that have been put in ours because of that. There's matching funds that the legislature has put up. There are a number of other mechanisms. But if I recall correctly, our conversation, it was to try and build that trust, but at the same time have a relatively short date to where you could actually start putting projects on the ground.
And that, as I recall it too, as we worked with the working group and did the initial work on this bill, was that we wanted to be able to put money on the ground before it was fully funded. Director Glenn.
Madam Chairman, if I could add, I think that is a good question, Representative Western, because we do have $24 million of ARPA funds that we need to spend in the next 3 or 4 years. We have an additional $2 million in tourism funds that we're putting to the ground. So if the body did decide to move forward with that, it would give us time to focus on those other projects and get those funded while this is happening. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I guess we'll, Representative Angeles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Butt, I did have a question. I didn't hear it quite. Did you say it was 15 million that was originally, or 50 million?
Madam Chair, Representative Angelos, 15.
Other questions? Representative Storr.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Question for Lucas. Would it be appropriate to consider putting an appropriation in this bill? Did we want to do so?
Luke.
Madam Chair, Representative Storr, I mean, certainly, yes, there is a current appropriation language that's kind of adjusting the appropriation that was made in the bill that was passed in the 2023 general session. But I mean, certainly if it's the will of the committee to add an additional appropriation to either of the accounts, that would be perfectly fine.
Thank you.
I think we risk the bill putting appropriation in, just my comment. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we'll move on.
So I believe, yes, I believe address subsection C on the bottom of page 15. So I'm flipping back over to page 16. The funds can, any person can give funds. And then subsection D, kind of an important part, this is the board where the board may expend funds from the income account for administrative purposes that are authorized under the act, essentially to be able to run the trust board, and but then also the additional disbursements from the income account may be for the following purposes. And this was simplified pretty far down by the working group. Currently, there's just 2 points. And so, it's planning, design, improvement, and maintenance of existing or new outdoor recreational infrastructure, as well as the acquisition of public access easements necessary to enhance that infrastructure.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Burkhardt.
So I guess a philosophical question, do we want to set a limit on how much can be spent for administrative costs?
As, are you thinking a percentage or a dollar amount or a percent?
Madam Chairman, I'm thinking around a percentage, just, that's become an issue of how much money gets spent on administrative costs versus spending on the projects that the legislature wants to fund.
Patrick?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and Representative Burkhardt. Currently in the legislation, and this is something Luke and I talked about between the last 2 meetings, but those administrative expenses, there is nothing listed in either of those Romanettes underneath it as far as defining what it is. The only place in this legislation that shows up is page 3, line C, where it mentions the board shall be reimbursed, which is all we truly anticipated being the administrative costs, at least from State Parks and Cultural Resources perspective. And so right now, that's the only, as far as I can tell, the only place where that's authorized.
Follow up? Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question for Luke, in Romanet I, did we leave, I think we had the word construction in there, but I can't remember. Is that just an oversight? Do we need to add construction on there?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, I don't have the old draft right in front of me. I don't recall construction, but absolutely I could double check on that if that needs to be included.
Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess, just to go back to Representative Burkhart's question, I think what happened with this bill in the Senate, and some of you senators, correct me if I'm wrong, that there were a few of them that had issues with the percentage that was put in the original bill for administrative costs. I think that's the reason that was kind of taken out, because is that what your remembrance is?
Senator Guru?
Yes, and just to follow up, Madam Chairman, yeah, that was a concern that was raised by a number of senators, and so that's why we kind of left it to right to the reimbursable on page 3, was to try to get at that, so that we weren't inadvertently just putting in a percentage, whereas the fund grew, that it became that we were growing government or something there, some backdoor thing, so left it right at reimbursable expenses. So thank you, Madam Chair.
So I have a question for Director Bud. Do you have a percentage of how does it work on your end with administrative costs?
Madam Chair, we do not, but I can tell you our administrative costs are less than 2%. And that's assuming, you have a $7.5 million a year in our administrative costs for everything, board, staff, and everything is about $650,000. So it's not, I guess, hopefully there's some comfort to Representative Burkhart. I don't see this program being, it probably will be less than that.
Any other questions? Okay, I guess we'll move on.
Okay. So then on page 16, kind of near the bottom, that last paragraph is subsection E, and this just says that no funds shall be initially expended from the income account for large projects except upon specific legislative authorization. And so, and once again, this is just the section to say that projects do have to be, approved by the select committee, that anything that is over the $200,000 will require that the select committee pass that bill, which was in the first amended section we discussed. And it also allows that the board may approve additional grants for large projects not to exceed a total of an additional $200,000.
Representative Burkhardt?
Okay, Madam Chairman, one of my nitpickies in going through bills, we originally say 200 or more $1,000 for a large project. This says 200,000, which matches that 200,000 in the large project. So I'm looking at conforming this to say less than 200,000, up to, but if we hit 200,000 as a second amount to the project, do we now have to vote on that through the legislature? This says that the board can expend those funds, but can't exceed 200,000, but could equal it. I know how nitpicky I am on these things, but that's just me.
So what's your suggestion in the language?
Up to, but not including 200,000.
So on line.
I'm just trying to conform it to what we've already
Okay.
said for a large project. Luke?
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart. Yeah, I think I understand your point, right? So if the board initially authorizes a large project, the board may approve additional grants. It does say not to exceed a total of an additional $200,000. So I think that would be the ceiling, right? So if it's anything over $200,000, it has to go back for legislative approval, but you want to make it something so it is more up to, but not to exceed $200,000?
Representative.
Chairman, what I'm looking at is we define large projects as 200,000 or more. So now we can give 200,000, which is the same as a large project, purely by the board giving that.
Well, it says not to exceed on line 22.
Not to exceed, but it doesn't say it can't equal. We start large projects at 200,000. We end this at 200,000. So there's that strange overlap. One penny overlap, yeah, as Representative Byron said.
Okay. All right.
I just want to make sure that we're specific.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we'll work on that language.
project for Luke. I didn't want him to be bored during the rest of the interim.
Yeah, Luke just sits around and eats bonbons, I'm sure, all day. Okay,
Right.
we'll move on. Luke?
But yeah, so right now it's not to exceed $200,000. Anything over that, right, it's kind of that limit up to the large projects. It does have to be approved by the select committee, and notice has to be given within 30 days of each approval to the select committee. And so then on subsection F, we're on page 17, just clearly establishes that the board shall not have the power of eminent domain. And then subsection G is the public access easement piece of this. So anything that is public access easement that is funded in whole or in part with any monies made available by this act, it's going to bind the parties to an agreement which provides that the state of Wyoming, as a third-party beneficiary, essentially has the right to enforce the terms of the easement, and essentially to be able to the state of Wyoming can take legal action to enforce those terms or recover from the proceeds of the value for a transfer or sale. And so the state would just receive a pro rata share of those proceeds. And then at the top of page 18, subsection H, just as it's the no kickbacks provision, that no funds dispersed under this act shall allow anyone to receive gratuities, kickbacks, gifts, commission or contingency fee that is made in connection with the appropriation or the associated grant made by the board.
Representative Burkhart?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So Luke, is kickbacks a technical term we use often? It seems a little odd in legislation, but I understand what it means.
Luke?
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, I don't remember off the top of my head if kickback is specifically defined in Wyoming statute, but I believe it is used in other places. I believe it's used within the Natural Resource Trust.
Okay.
Director Bud?
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, there is a clause in all of our contracts that specifically says no kickbacks. So that term is the term that is used.
Follow up? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I know, we're on page 18 and it's section 3, that is the appropriation. I thought we might actually would want to jump back to the very beginning of the bill so that we kind of continue in statutory order of the provisions for the trust. So so on page 1 is just the bill title, and then kind of, I'm moving on to page 2. So so we went through 36.4.202 and 203, and that's where we ended. So now we're getting to 36.4.204, and this is all newly created language. And so the first, so 204 is where we create the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Trust Account Board. It shall consist of 9 members appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. They have to be residents of Wyoming, and they'll be appointed from each of the appointment districts set forth in 53101, which is the judicial districts. It's the exact same language as from the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. We do, that last sentence though is a change. It similar to the Natural Resource Trust, but this is where the board membership shall reflect a broad spectrum of outdoor recreation experiences. And it was whittled down to wildlife management, sportsman, tourism, motorized and non-motorized recreation, and private land ownership. So it's just that.
Representative Burkhart?
Madam Chairman, in this, I'm on line 15, and we mentioned wildlife management. Are we now kind of overlapping the 2 trust funds? I mean, I always thought the WWNRT was for wildlife issues. Now we've added them in here. And in the trust fund, the Wildlife Trust Fund, we've defined certain membership, including minerals, private industry, that sort of thing. Do we want to do that here? I'm just rolling this all into one kind of question. I guess, when we set up the trust fund, wildlife issues were a major topic of why we would do that. But reality is we already have a way of doing that. So are we confusing two different trust funds here?
I think I'm going to take part of that and say that the wildlife management piece is to have the committee take into account the impact on wildlife that outdoor recreation has, and to look at those impacts that might, so if somebody brings a project to put a trail through as we were talking about earlier, that calving ground or places where wildlife spends 2 or 3 weeks, we don't want to have that happen, and it could happen just out of ignorance. And so we think it's important that the wildlife folks have a seat at the table to have that input, and if anybody else wants to take that as well.
Madam Chair,
Director Bud.
I was one of the people who encouraged that this be there to get the overlap. I think Chairman Newsom outlined or described it quite well, but having that overlap is important because there are going to be areas where we will have to look at, I mean, there are going to be projects we jointly fund in which there may be a component that's one piece is wildlife habitat and the other piece is access and that sort of thing. I think it's healthy to have that overlap. And then the other thing I would say is it's just like our board. It's broad. It doesn't say they have to be there. It says that they should consider that type of representation. So I applaud this being in here.
Any other questions? Okay, Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just, I guess, to put a point on it, the real change in the language here between the two drafts, we're cleaning up a couple of the listed user group or interest types, and then adding that language such as, which, as Director Bud mentioned, allows some of the flexibility and broadness of that language and of the board makeup in general.
Any other follow-up? Okay, all right, I guess we'll move on.
All right, the last paragraph, thank you, Madam Chair. The last paragraph on page 2 is subsection B, and this just provides for the appointment of members. They're going to serve 6-year terms, and they may be reappointed for 1 additional term. And upon the creation of the board, 3 members will be appointed for 2 years, 3 members will be appointed for 4, 3 members will be appointed for a term of 6 years, just to kind of stagger them out so that as new people come onto the board. The governor may remove any of the members as provided by law, and any vacancy between sessions can be filled by the governor. It's fairly standard language there, and the board is just going to select one of its members to serve as chairman. Subsection C in the middle of page 3.
Director Bud.
Madam Chair, I would just, based on experience, encourage you to expand that last sentence to say the board shall select one of its members to serve as chairman and one of its members to serve as vice chairman.
Oh, okay.
There are circumstances where your chairman is unable to attend. You need to have a backup so that you can constitute a quorum and conduct business.
Chair,
Senator Ellis.
do you need that in statute or can't you do that in rule?
Director Bud.
Madam Chair, I would defer to Senator Ellis legally. If you can do it in rule, that's fine. You selected one here in statute, so does that preclude you from doing the other in rule is why I raised the issue.
Senator Ellis.
Madam Co-Chair, I just wonder how the trust works. Do you have that spelled out in the Wildlife Trust that you have a chair and vice chair? Usually in the statutes I look at with the boards and commissions, it just says someone shall be elected as a chair.
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, I don't have the statute in front of me. I don't know. We've always had both, so I can check and get back to you.
Madam Chair, I've asked Management Council to look at our boards and commissions for this very reason. I mean, it's all over the map. And so to your point, and this doesn't sound like it's a big deal, but it's, if we're creating boards and commissions and they say that they have to have a chair and a vice chair, then if we start putting that language in, then that starts precluding if you have just chair for other boards and commissions, then they can't do vice chair. It's silly, but not. So that's where I think consistency matters.
Okay. All right, I guess we'll look into that. Okay.
So yeah, subsection C in the middle of page 3 is that the secretary to the board shall be the manager of the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation Office within the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. It's up to the secretary to the board to administer funds at the direction of the board and act as a liaison between from the board and other state, federal, and local governmental entities, as well as nonprofit organizations. Oh, I really thought I got non-resident everywhere, but I noticed I missed that as well. Who seek to give input regarding grant proposals. And so here, one of this first staff comment on the bottom of page 3 was one of the other questions that came up during the working group discussion about whether to incorporate tribes or cooperative tribal governing bodies into this act. And there is not uniformity throughout statute necessarily. whether tribes and the cooperative tribal governing bodies should be included in state programs or are included in state-funded programs. I gave an example from the Business Ready Community Program that's run by the Wyoming Business Council, where it does include that, and I think that's an example of language that could be inserted if it is the desire of the committee.
Is there a comment? Senator Schiller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just would ask Director Bud, is that something you guys have within your trust fund?
Director Bud.
In addition with the tribal folks?
Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair, it is not in our statute.
Any other comments about that piece? Senator Ellis.
I'm pro insertion of the language. Even in the Business Ready Community, or in the Business Council program, there was some real confusion. We had some language in there and we had to go back and make it even clearer because the Attorney General's office has really narrowed it in on that. So simply, just because we didn't include it for the other trusts doesn't mean we shouldn't here. I think it's more, it's been really difficult with some of our AG interpretations to even get money to tribes when they apply for it. So just because it's not there in other things doesn't mean it shouldn't be here. If we want to make funding available. And there's language you'll see on page 4, lines 6 and 7. We can talk about that more if anyone has questions, but I really think we need to include it.
Okay, then as we go through the bill, we'll look at that. Okay.
So yeah, then in the middle of page 4, thank you, Madam Chair, is subsection D. The board shall meet regularly, but not less than 4 times per year. That was a decision of the working group to change it from 1 to 4. And then members shall serve without compensation, but shall be reimbursed for expenses incurred in the performance of their duties. And so this was another question. This is kind of why there's a lengthy staff comment coming up. But yeah, so primarily in statute, there can people who serve on boards and different different body corporates or what have you, are reimbursed generally either in bylaw for state employees or for legislators. And so the staff comment on the bottom of page 4 and kind of goes on to all of page 5 is just a discussion between the two. I tried to provide some of the statutory reference to first state employees and how their reimbursement works. They can be reimbursed for lodging and meal expenses primarily. And so they have to be on official business, but yeah, they can also, it can be transportation, lodging expenses, and allowance for meals and incidental expenses and other, anything else that could be considered reimbursable if it's in the conduct of the official business of the state. And so providing reimbursement to board members provided by law is a fairly common method used in statute, particularly for boards. I just gave a few examples, such as the Wyoming Senior Services Board, the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund Board, the Weed and Pest Control District Boards of Directors. Those are just a few of the ones that popped up, but if we look at legislators, when it specifically provided for that, there's the per diem amount to be received by members of the legislature for expenses, it's on an amount determined by the state auditor that is equal to those established by the General Services Administration, the U.S. General Services Administration, and it can provide up to $150 salary for members. Well, that wouldn't necessarily be for this one, it's not a salary, but it allows for a mileage rate, which is also further addressed, that statutory mileage for necessary travel to attend and return from an approved interim activity. So once again, this is actually used fairly frequently in statute, but it's commonly more seen in body corporates and some boards. Some of those examples are the Wyoming Lottery Corporation, the Wyoming Higher Education Assistance Authority, and the Wyoming Board of Physical Therapy. So it's really, just a matter of the committee's decision on if you'd prefer one or the other or any reimbursement provided to the members of the board.
So a question to Director Glenn. Do you know how your board is reimbursed? And Director Bud?
Madam Chairman, I can actually speak for Director Bud, but I can't speak for my own committee. I just read the statute with Director Bud's, and they are reimbursed per state employee. And I believe ours is as well, but I will look that up and get back to you.
Okay. Senator Ellis.
Madam Chair, I'm wondering if the difference is on then the salary. When we're serving in our legislative capacities, we get a day of salary. When you're a state employee, why would you get a salary? That's already part of your job. You're just getting reimbursed your travel expenses. So what I'm wanting to tease out is what is fair and right. Like, I don't know that again, we don't have this figured out, I think, in our statutes wildly clearly, but, I'm tending to go, do we want these to be volunteer positions? Are they generally volunteer positions? I think they are. So probably no salary, so probably like reimbursed like a state employee. I'm just trying to narrow in on this, but I see the inconsistency, and I think it's just a matter of fairness of how we treat people who are appointed to these boards and commissions. Some of them get that money and some of them don't.
Madam Chair.
Director Bud.
Madam Chair, my understanding of the difference is that if you're reimbursed as a state employee, you're reimbursed for your actual lodging expense and you get a per diem. And then your mileage is whatever the federal rate is. My understanding of the legislative is there is a set amount for per diem that includes lodging, and you have to live within that number. And that's the difference, is that the actual lodging is what a state employee can bill within whatever the allowable amount is. Does that sound track with you, Luke?
Just to follow up, Madam Chair.
Senator.
Kind of. We can also submit, if our per diem isn't enough to cover our expenses, we can submit receipts in lieu of receiving the per diem. So you can either say, I want the per diem, here are my receipts. So, but we also get a salary. And that's the piece of it I don't see on the state employee compensation side.
Madam Chair, a state employee cannot submit, we submit what it is. And if you're over the allowable lodging rate, then you have to submit an explanation as to why. For example, Jackson, it was an event weekend and there were no lodging available for that rate. And then that has to be approved by the auditor. I think there's a slight difference in yours. You can take one or you can do the other. We don't get one or the other. It's one with the exception specifically to lodging.
Madam Chair, I think we're fine on the travel expenses, per diem, same thing. It's the salary. Whether or not people appointed to this should receive a salary. I think.
But I think under a state employee reimbursement, they don't receive a salary. Is that right? And under a legislative reimbursement, we do, but our per diem is less unless we have receipts.
Right. And I think just for the purposes of where we are, I think that's the biggest distinction is, do they get salary or not? I think that there's some differences between travel reimbursement, but that's the bigger question.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Burkhart.
So, thank you, Madam Chairman. At times, we've had great difficulty in filling boards and commissions and that sort of thing. And I would say we go with whatever benefits the member most. If you look at the parole board, that's not a job most of us would want. And any benefit we can give people on some of these boards and commissions, however minor, to me is a plus to, to get people to serve. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Madam Co-Chair, Management Council, I hope you're listening. I've asked you to look at this issue.
Okay.
Madam Chairman,
Director Glenn.
my phone a friend, Nick Nalen, behind me just texted and said that the Spacer Commission is like state employees as well.
Okay.
So, thank you.
So Bob, you're state employees, so that would be consistent with the outdoor regulation that we do, so state employees would be the most consistent, I believe.
Madam Chair, I do believe that would be the most consistent. Most boards, especially I think in terms of similar boards, are by state employees, and most of them do include that language without compensation, shall serve without compensation. So that's just a question if you want to consider providing a salary.
Okay. Director Bud.
I hesitate to raise this, but I think it's important that I do it. Madam Chair, where you're trying to have nimble staff and limited staff, if you go to a salary system, particularly on a board like mine where you're doing site visits and other things, you're going to create a accounting nightmare for my grants manager, in the sense that if I do a site visit for half a day, do I get a salary of $75? What do I get a salary on the day I go to the meeting and the day I'm at the meeting? these types of boards, we have not had a problem filling this board. It's very different than the parole board or, but it is a volunteer. And I think that it's really important to realize that you can put a burden on the program on the administrative side with a well-intentioned reward for those people. That would be a real deal for us to have to deal with, those 6 meetings a year, to have to sort out who came from where and how many days and how long it took them, or where they came the day before, came that day, where they went home the next day. It can be an accounting nightmare.
All right, are we good? Okay, moving on. Look, we get to skip a page.
So yeah, I believe we're on page 6, unless anybody had any further questions about the board or how many times they have to meet. And so subsection E at the very top of page 6 is just, the board shall receive and evaluate applications for grants from the income account. They have to forward applications for large projects to the select committee, but they can approve grants for any small project, anything less than $200,000, and funds in the income account are continually appropriated for that purpose. This is language, once again, similar to the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. Subsection F is that the board shall adopt rules and regulations in accordance with the Wyoming Administrative Procedure Act as necessary to carry out its duties. I realize I meant to include a staff comment here because I believe there was a question about the Public Records Act and the Public Meetings Act. Boards are included in the definitions of those who are subject to those. So it's not necessarily within the APA, but it is, boards are, just generally they're defined that boards are included and are subject to those provisions. So,
Madam Chairman.
Representative Burkhart.
Luke, I'm on page 6, line 8. Is that the correct quote, 364203F? Because if you go back to page 14, well, actually, it moves over to, that's 364203, and F is on page
Madam Chair,
17,
Representative Burkhart.
and F is a eminent domain.
It should be E. I noticed that after we already sent it out. When I was preparing for the meeting, I've already got it marked. That was
Okay.
just we had moved some things in 203E, and and I tried to search them and make sure I find all the right references, but that one just got missed. So so I've already got it noted and it will be updated.
Okay, Luke, thank you. As most of you can tell, I do read these.
That's good. Thank you.
So then, so jumping back to F, so these are the duties of the board under this act. There are several, but I'll just try and run through them fairly quickly. They have to establish criteria for grants from the income account. They have to establish criteria for matching funds or other in-kind contributions from grantees. They need to evaluate and rank grant proposals with an emphasis on projects that include support from multiple partners and funding sources. That last portion was an update from the working group. Moving on to page 7, under this is paragraph 4, that they need to review and monitor grants to grantees. They need to evaluate the effects of grant proposals on providing recreation and tourism opportunities for residents and non-residents. Once again, that last half of the sentence was an update from the working group. The middle of page 7, it is paragraph 6, is establish criteria for the acceptance or rejection of gifts, transfers, bequests, those such things, including interest in real or personal property. The board shall make the board themselves can't accept an interest in real property. It has to be recommended to the Board of Land Commissioners. And then the Board of Land Commissioners can make a final determination on whether or not to accept or reject anything that is, offered up to the board. Subsection 7 it's kind of a new language in there as well. It's to consider the socioeconomic, natural resource, wildlife, and cultural benefits and impacts of grant proposals on local communities. And then on the top of page 8, this was, so it's it's paragraph 8, and it was actually moved up from under what the board may do. And so now it's a duty that they consult or ensure that the applicant has consulted with other governmental entities, stakeholders, nonprofit organizations, and as it's deemed appropriate. And so those are the required duties of the board. If there's any questions on that one.
Question? Guess not.
Well, then moving forward, yeah, so subsection G is are the other duties that the board may do. They can accept or decline federal grants and other contributions. Same thing with kind of talking about the real property that has to be recommended to the Board of Land Commissioners. And then they also can recommend to the Joint Appropriations Committee and the Select Committee that funds be transferred from the income account to the trust account. H is a new provision that is included here. Once again, was another recommendation from the working group to include essentially a conflict of interest provision. And so it just says that, yeah, any board member or employee shall not vote or otherwise participate in any matter that they would have a financial interest in, and that they would be required to disclose that interest as well. So flipping over to page 9, subsection J is just the reporting requirements that the board report to the governor, JAC, the select committee, and of course this committee no later than October 1st with respect to all grants, appropriations, contributions, anything that were credited to the trust or income account during the preceding fiscal year, and it shall include all grants awarded by the board to nonprofit and governmental organizations, including any progress that was made towards the condition of any grant made. So that's kind of the big bulk. That's 204. Moving forward to 205 is just providing some direction on grant applications and who is an eligible entity. Subsection A at the bottom of page 9 is that the board shall only grant funds to nonprofit and governmental organizations. The board shall award grants in accordance with Wyoming Statute 204 E and F, kind of providing with the duties of the board. And that was kind of changed. It used to be more kind of a purpose statement, and that was changed just to be specifically to what the board shall do. And that the board does have the discretion to determine the amount of each grant and any conditions that shall be attached to the grant. Grants shall not provide a supplement to or replacement of the operating budget of any agency or nonprofit organization, except for those that are directly related to the purposes of the Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Act here, and that that no grants can be awarded under this act until rules and regulations have been adopted by the board. And 206 is just kind of a general commonly used provision to just say audits. This one is, and now instead of it saying annually like it does for the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust, it says that the Department of Audit shall audit this trust account on a regular basis, kind of providing for that, and then copies have to be provided to the same reporting people. And then that gets us back to where we were to start, and so we're gonna jump one more time back to the appropriations and then the effective date language. And so that would be beginning on page 18. So during the 2023 general session, yes, it was 2023 Wyoming Session Law, Chapter 153 is what created the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Trust account. It just created the account, and it did provide for a $6 million appropriation. What Section 3 does is it basically says, okay, so starting with the next biennium, which will be in 2024, when the next $6 million should be coming out of the Wyoming Tourism Reserve and Projects account, that money can be split. So of that $6 million appropriation, $4 million is going to go into the trust account, and then the other $2 million will go into the income account to allow for projects to get started if they wish to start spending that money right away. And it just has to be spent, in terms that are consistent with this act. And so then if you move on to Section 4, this is the language, we're amending the language from that session law from last year that was passed. So this is non-codified law that is being amended. It is that $6 million appropriation that was just going into the trust account. And just it includes the sentence to say, yeah, basically that any recurring appropriation may be divided between the trust account and the income account, as is going to be done in this bill if it were to stay the same way. And and one kind of changes, it does say that, that any appropriation may be divided as directed by the legislature. It was just kind of a cleanup a little bit, in discussion within LSO and with the budget fiscal staff. It was kind of recommended that this language is could be important just to make sure that if you're going to split an appropriation that was already set in a previous law, just that it actually is authorized. And, but it is, of course, still open and subject to change by the legislature. So that was kind of the reason for that change, but also the inclusion in this prior appropriation language.
Madam Chair.
Representative Burkhart.
So I guess a general question, the proposed split of 4 million, 2 million, is that actually needed? How was that calculated?
I can probably take that. We thought it would be good to have money on the ground to start, but now that we understand that there are some ARPA funds, and then there's the $2 million allocation from the tourism budget already, that maybe we would defer that for a biennium. So that's that's a policy question. And I don't know if Director Glenn, if you want to expound on that, or Senator Guru.
Well, just a question, if someone wanted to do that, how would you change that back in the original section then, to just amend that back to 6 million for a biennium, or would you do it in this section here? Where would be the best place to affect that change?
Luke.
Madam Chair, Senator Guru. So you're saying if you don't split the money, if we would just want to leave it, I think actually we would just remove all of this language from the bill draft. The reason it's inserted is to allow for that split. Currently, so it's under section 4, right? I kind of included that sentence, but this is technically a recurring biennial appropriation. So every 2 years, $6 million will be coming out of the Wyoming Tourism Reserve and Projects account, at least, as long as the legislature lets it run.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I put a finer point on it, if I didn't want to do it for a time, whether it was 1 biennium or 3, would you?
Sure.
Could you change? Would you want to leave that language in and just change the time frame then? Would that be the best way to it? Because then if we take it out completely, we could put it back in later, or depending on what the intent, I guess, of the group is. But I'm looking at Senator Ellis down there. I want to be consistent.
Madam Chair, Senator Guru. Yeah, so it's, I think particularly section 3 at the, kind of the middle of page 18, starting on line 8. Yeah, it just says beginning with the fiscal biennium commencing on July 1st, 2024. I think if you wanted to push it until the biennium that starts on July 1st, 2026, if you wanted to include that in that language in this bill, yeah, I think it would just be more of a time frame change. It's just, the rest of the language is just to say the money that's already a recurring biennial appropriation, we're going to split it, and so you could just change the time as you'd like.
Thank you.
Anything else? Senator Ellis.
I understand why we have, it's a belt and suspenders approach when you add this kind of amending session law, but we've talked about this. I just don't like the practice of it. I think a better approach is, if you had a section 4 that said, whatever we intend to do, this isn't, whatever we intend to do will supplant or replace what we, said in 2023. I just think that's a better approach of reflecting, we're making a change to what happened without technically going back and amending what's already been printed or as non-codified law. That's as we move forward, my preference.
So, so we would take this language out, the added language, and put it elsewhere?
Madam Chair, I think when we work the bill, maybe we can come up with things. But Luke, do you understand what I'm saying? It's a slight technicality, but the reason I don't like amending the session law is it's printed, the public looks at it, and then they don't know that you've amended it. The only way they know that is if they go back and look at these bills. And so it's really, I think, just a transparency issue. I'm not going to follow my sword. We do this all the time, but I think that's a better approach.
Okay.
Madam Chair, just a brief comment on that. It does, so The section 3, which is where the split is happening, it does identify 2023 Wyoming Session Law, Chapter 153, Section 2, which is basically what's being amended in Section 4 at the top of page 19. It's just, once again, it's just that language inserted was a suggestion of LSO just between, discussion with legal staff and then also with budget fiscal. Just, it is a little bit of a belt and suspenders, but the idea is just to make sure that that is authorized to do that split. So it's really kind of up to the will of the committee. But so, yeah, I certainly think we can address it, come back to that and consider that again. So if we want to just kind of continue on the bill and jump to page 20.
Okay.
So section 5 kind of, sandwich right there in between the staff comments. This bill is currently just effective July 1st, 2024. And so what I've done in the staff comment on the second half of page 20 is just to provide some alternatives. So you could just make the entire bill effective immediately. That would allow the governor to start filling the board, then they could start rules, and that would just happen as soon as the bill passes. Or it's second, so it's on line 33 where it starts with the sentence second. The committee could choose to bifurcate the effective date, and you could also create a new section to allow the governor, for governor appointments and rulemaking to begin immediately while the rest of the act becomes effective on July 1st, 2024. And so that language is available on page 21. And so it's just really kind of up to the committee, however you'd like to approach the effective date and whether or not to incorporate that additional section.
So I think that the discussion here in our working group was if we did put money in the income account right away, that then we would want the board in place right away. But if we're looking at deferring, putting money in the income account right away, then we can just make it effective July and we don't have a bifurcated enactment date. So any comment on that? Representative Burkhart.
Madam Chairman, I would go for the bifurcated dates. Gives the governor an opportunity to put people in place, gives them an opportunity to come up with rules and regs before everything else goes into effect. And I think that's consistent with a number of these we've done. Put the administrative end in place so that it can kick off the minute the act becomes effective on the 1st of July of the year. And frankly, I think we make too many pieces of legislation effective immediately anyway, so.
Right, but is it, the policy question is it effective to create a board when we don't have any funding for them?
I would say yes, it gives them an opportunity to plan.
But to make that happen immediately, and for 2 years, they won't have any money.
I might be confused. I thought we already had some money available.
Well, it goes to state parks. It doesn't go to the trust fund, as I understand it. The money currently that will go for outdoor recreation is going to state parks. It's not going to the trust fund. Am I misunderstanding that, Director Glenn?
Madam Chairman, are you talking about the $6 piece?
No, about the 2 million that you got from tourism and the ARPA funds.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, that is going directly to state parks. 2 million came from Office of Tourism, and that goes to Patrick's team to grant out for outdoor recreation infrastructure.
But not through this
But
piece of
not through
lesson.
this, correct.
So, Madam Chairman, I guess then, if we make everything effective on July 1st, then we have a gap in there of when the governor appoints a board, and it takes time to do that. And I was looking at giving the governor an opportunity to appoint a board,
Okay,
and that's all. And again, as you said, it's a policy question.
so Senator Guru, you,
Just a question, if I could, Madam Chairman, for the group. If we were to bifurcate it and not appropriate money right now, let that money that's there grow in the corpus. But we have this other money, but we create the template and we have a board. Could you see a value, Acting Director Glenn, to maybe use the board and use this new apparatus that you have to start using it to vet projects through them, or even mimicking that process for yourself?
Director Glenn?
Madam Chairman, Senator Guru, just the process of creating rules can take up to a year's time.
Right.
So working with that board to work on that piece, the answer is yes. Would we need, if you're talking 2 or 3 bienniums, would we need 5 years? Probably not, but having a couple years and to have that board kind of support some of the other work that is happening through the Outdoor Recreation Office granting program, absolutely.
Thank you.
Director Bud.
Madam Chair, I was an advocate for the effective immediately on this, on the working group, for the simple reason that you've highlighted, Representative Burkhart, which is you can appoint your board, but if there's no funding there to pay their expenses to get to the meetings, then you've got a disconnect. So if you chose the bifurcated, I think you need to put an appropriation with it that will allow them to be paid their expenses to go to the meetings. That would be the only, and because it's just easier to say, make it effective immediately, that's where my head ended up.
Senator Ellis.
I'll be the naysayer in all of it. I think July 1st, because we're getting wound up about 4 months, or worked over about 4 months. It's March, April, May, June, then it takes effect July. So we're talking about 4 months. And the reason that we have effective dates is to allow the public to see what we did and let all the dust settle. I know that this is a lot of inside baseball that I'm sure we'll know a lot of people who will want to be on this board, but I think that the public deserves a right to have it be out there in the sphere and then start asking questions if they want to participate. And I also agree, like, effective immediately is for emergencies. This is not an emergency. It's important, but it's not an emergency. So I'm a straight up July 1 gal.
All right. Any other comment? I love the clarity. That's awesome.
But Madam Chair, I have no further comments on the bill.
Okay. I think at this point now we will take public comment. So if you guys stay nearby, don't leave too far. Oh, Director Schober.
Madam Chairman and members of the committee, I just would like some clarity. Director Glenn and I were having a conversation on page 18, section 3. It says, beginning with the fiscal biennium of July 24, which will be next year, that there would be the biennial transfer. But then on page 19, section 2, line 5 and 6, it says there is appropriated the $6 million from the project and reserve account. My understanding was that when the initial bill to establish this was set up, that there would be a transfer taken out of money in this biennium, this current biennium, and then they would start with the recurring bienniums after July 1st, so starting with the biennium of 25-26. We've already received information from the Department of Revenue and the State Auditor's Office to establish the transfer of these funds out of the Tourism Reserve Account from Fund 442 into this trust fund. And I just sent a note to ask if they would check on the balance of Fund 442 so we could see if it had been moved. But what my question was is, will there be money coming in what's left of this biennium, which I think is part of your conversation about bifurcation? And or would it wait and start with transfers after July 1st of 24 of next year?
I think
I
we
don't know
don't
the
know
answer,
that.
but in the proceeds of budgeting out of that fund for this biennium, there has already been the plan of a transfer of $6 million before July 1st of 24. Now, whether that action has been taken or it will be taken, I don't know, but the budget on that account is planned to remove that $6 million in this biennium. So there could be an additional, possibly, I'm checking on that. I'm bringing it up to only cloud
So-
the issue a little bit further for
Okay.
all of you.
Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome. Glad I could muddy.
So
Thank
it's
you.
your understanding that there possibly has been 6 million already deposited in the fund? And then another 6 million would come in this
On
next,
this, based on what we're doing here to establish the administration of this fund. But I could be incorrect, but I just wanted, and I would defer to Luke and others who would have known about the first bill that set this up, and now you're setting up the board and the administrative functions of everything. So,
Okay, so if we could find that out
Yeah.
somewhere, that would be great. Because it'd be great if we already had money in there.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair,
Luke,
Oh, if I may, just
sorry.
briefly, I believe, and I am not, I would need to do a little more double check, but I believe, so the original appropriation was to take $6 million this year. So I think there was $6 million transferred into the trust account, this trust account on July 1st, 2023. That was the
Okay, and
part
then
of
there
this.
would be another
next July
next
1st.
July 1st, July
Another
of
$6 million.
2024. Okay,
Yes.
Representative Burkhardt?
Madam Chair, all I was going to say is on page 19, Luke had already covered that because you have session law quoted there that already covered that, that said there is appropriated to that. So
Right,
to me, it was already taken care of.
okay. All right, so we will go to public comment. Thank you all for your help, and don't go very far away. So public comment, we'll have. Okay, you guys flip a coin and see who goes first? Or arm wrestle, or how did, I don't know.
Madam Chair and committee, thanks very much. Mike Cusick with Wyoming Pathways. Just wanted to thank you for all your work. It's exciting to see this move forward. Era and I are part of a group that has been working together since the first time we met in Evanston to kind of bring a bunch of groups together and say, how can we make this work for everybody? And we feel like we have that in front of us now, and we're grateful. And just wanted to say thank you.
Wow. I was getting all settled in, Mike. Era.
Era Arno, Wyoming Outdoor Council. We just want to say thank you for the work on the bill, and with the inclusion of wildlife, we support it and look forward to the ways it'll enhance our economy and way of life. And I'll stand for questions.
Any questions for either? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for, a question for both of you. Is there anything that we've missed that you think that we didn't add in this? We want to get it right the first time around. So do you have any suggestions at all?
You know, I think perhaps it was an oversight, and I think Senator Ellis brought it up, but the word construction is very useful in this bill as we go forward. A lot of the things we're looking at have funding streams for repair or modification, but very few have funding streams of this size for new construction. And as we talked before, we have folks coming here from all over the West and all over the world to enjoy our outdoor landscapes. It's time to build things that manage them the right way, and I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us that way. So I would look for that addition.
Era.
The other things that we had concerns about, the committee has discussed in going through the bill. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any questions, concerns? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Any other public comment? Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Chris Brown, representing Wyoming Hospitality and Travel Coalition. Again, we stand in support of the bill. I testified last meeting, and so I won't reiterate most of that, but I think there's two important points that we've discussed that do benefit from underscoring. One is the fact that with this bill, both residents and non-residents stand to benefit from the projects that could come from this. I think that's very important. The second point is that last meeting we heard testimony both in support of and cautioning growing the visitor economy. Obviously, it's state's second largest industry that contributed more than $240 million to the state last year. Growing, that's a good thing in many people's perspective. Too much of a good thing in some areas can be too much. And I think that the ability for communities of all sizes, from the very smallest to the very biggest in the state, having that ability, spreading people around the state is what addresses both sides of that discussion, growing the visitor economy and having a focus on not overcrowding. And so I believe this bill speaks to both of those and is a good bill. And again, we stand in support.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Brown? Nope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Mr. Sweeney, glad to see you here.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So Pat
it's in-
Sweeney from Casper. And I'm totally supportive of the changes. The only thing when this first bill came before the committee, there was no talk of robbing the special account from the tourism account from the lodging tax. And in order to have the bill, I think you ended up at this place in this past session. My only caution is that's where long-term funding reoccurring by appropriation, and hope that someday we can grow into Director Budd's program through the legislative action of the Appropriations Committee. In my mind, passing the lodging tax, this wasn't part of the thought process of all of that in my mind. And not that I don't think this is a good use, but having listened to the Appropriations Committee, just their last meeting, I believe it was, all of a sudden there's another need for the new guidelines of the State Museum. So this fund cannot sustain itself on the original premise, that these funds could go towards other things, development, website development, any new technologies, and the rest in my mind. But so I just hope maybe some language could be added, because I really don't see it where by some mechanism the trust fund could be truly funded by the legislature, which I think is going to be difficult to do in future actions. But those are my only thoughts, and I'm concerned about that, Madam Chairman. So,
Any questions for Mr. Sweeney? Thank you, Pat. Any other public comment? Going once, going twice. Oh, man, I almost got to 3 times. Jeremiah, how are you?
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. I promise I won't take long and won't rain on any parade. Members of the committee, I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Appreciate your good, solid work on this legislation. It's been an honor to work with you. It was great to hear from Director Budd talk about his program, because at the end of the day, this legislation is modeled after that particular program. And I certainly would hope that the department takes to heart the ability to steal from that program as they set up the administrative function, the rules and regulations, the board operation, the very things that you heard this morning, because of all of the value that that brings from a financial perspective, that brings from a public input perspective, and frankly, getting good things done on the ground. So it was great to hear that. And to your question, Representative Burkhart, yes, this is, I think all of our vision is that it follows the lead of the trust. Just a couple of things that I will quickly talk about. On page 7, and I'm going to take a little fault here. I like to tell my boys that I'm perfect. I say that in jest to them, but working with the working group, Page 7, provision Romanet 7. I just feel it reads a little bit backwards. We put the benefits and impacts at the back end of that sentence of grant proposals on local communities. I think we're looking for those things in relationship to the local communities, as well as the socioeconomic and cultural and wildlife resources. So I tried to redraft that quickly, and I can provide it to LSO as well as you. It keeps all the same language, just I think it flows a little better. And so what I wrote is consider the benefits and impacts of grant proposals on local communities, its socioeconomics, and its cultural, natural, and wildlife resources. It's, again, I wrote the original language that you all took, and I'm trying to make it better to flow. So take it or leave it. I don't want to disrupt the bill all that much here. I do support the notion of adding in construction on page 16, line 10, because obviously we do want to construct new things here, whatever that might be under the definitions that you have all provided. The last thing that I wanted to just speak to is the funding, and make sure that we get this right. Right now, of course, we do have funding going into the trust account. That's clearly written into the session laws or the laws last year. But it also says that we have to come back and make a decision, or you all have to come back and make a decision on how that's going to be appropriated moving forward. I'm certainly fine with a little bit of pause here with the funding that exists today. I say that with a little bit of pause because, again, as you heard, not everybody can benefit from those ARPA dollars necessarily, given the Treasury guidance. And two, that $2 million, unless you appropriate new dollars, is going to go away in the not too distant future. And I'd hate for us to take out section 3 on page 18 and be in a situation where in 2 or 3 years, we're knocking on your door again and saying, please do something, free up the account, let us do something good for you. So I would just encourage you, whatever we do there, to ensure that the mechanism exists, that money will, after this bill passes, go into that income account so that we can begin to show proof of concept and show you good things moving forward. With that, Madam Chairwoman, support the bill. Really appreciate your work on it and look forward to helping you get it across the finish line this upcoming session.
Thank you. Any questions for Jeremiah? No? Okay, thank you so much for your comments. Okay, any other public comment? All right, then I think we'll bring it back and we'll go and work the bill. Or I don't think, do we need okay. Moved by Senator Ellis, seconded by Representative Western to move the bill. All right, so we'll go through page by page. So I think anything on page 1?
Madam Chair, is it okay if Luke comes back over?
Absolutely.
And
Come join us.
Madam Chair, one other question. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anybody online.
Oh, was there anybody online for this?
Okay,
They're
so
all
just
for
wanted to make sure.
fishing.
Thanks.
Okay, I guess we'll go ahead. Anything on page 2?
Madam Chair.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move on page 2, line 15, strike the word such and insert which may include. There are a group of legislators who really dislike the word such. Not me, but others.
Okay. Moved by Senator Ellis, seconded by Senator Guru.
Madam Chairman,
Open for discussion?
Just for clarification, do we also want to drop the word as?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So deleting on line 15, deleting such as and replacing it with which may include. Is that correct, Senator? Okay. All right. Any,
It's called desuchification.
oh, word of the day. I like it. Calling for the question. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Okay, moving on. We'll make that change. Moving on to page 3.
Madam Chair.
Senator Ellis?
Just two things really quick. I looked at the Wildlife Trust. This language about the vice chair, chair on line 7, this mirrors what is in the Wildlife Trust. So I think we're fine. I think they'll have discretion enough to appoint a vice chair.
Okay, so leave it as it is.
So leave that as it is.
Okay.
But Madam Chair, I would move on page 3, line 15. After the word agencies, insert Eastern Shoshone or Northern Arapaho Tribe or the cooperative tribal governing body. And this is a term of art. You can look at it on page 4, lines 5 and 6. So I don't think I need to repeat it. This is consistent with some changes we made to try and provide some consistency throughout our statutes and how we address our tribes. And by doing this, then it allows either the Eastern Shoshone tribe by itself, the Northern Arapaho tribe by themselves, or their cooperative body to apply for funds. And then the reason it's also structured this way is you'll see on line 15, that's pretty specific to agencies. And so I can see where a state agency, a federal agency, or a local governmental agency might apply, but we don't necessarily want to tie the hands of the tribe if they want to apply as a tribal government and not an agency of their tribe. So that's the amendment and why it's worded that way.
Okay, is that a lot like moving? And would you be amenable to add to your amendment that on line 16, we change visitors to non-resident?
Which page, I'm sorry?
Page 16, I mean, page 3, line 16.
Correct, yes.
I thought that's what you wanted. Okay, in a second on that, seconded by Representative Singh.
Question.
Senator Guru?
Question for the bringer of the motion of the first half. I just want to make sure I'm clear. So either tribe, not both. Do we need to put in any other language to specify the council, or not only because, and I only ask that question because at a couple other times I've encountered this where members of the tribe comes and talks, and then I get told, well, that's not what the ruling council feels, and we get into this, kind of get into a back and forth. I just want to make sure that we're getting what we want to get out of this, or you're getting what you want to get out of this, I guess, or explain it to me.
Yep.
Senator Ellis?
Madam Chair, so what this would do, and we've defined this in other parts of the statute where it just kind of covers a blanket definition, but this would require the Eastern Shoshone tribe, which their governing body is composed of a business council, they've got a general council, but for the purposes of how the federal government recognizes them and how we recognize them, it's a vote of their council. This would preclude like the Northern Arapaho Housing Authority from applying because they're not the tribe. So they're not any, I mean, that's an agency of the tribe, but this would be very clear that if the tribes each want to apply for money or jointly apply for money, it would require tribal council approval. So I think this is the cleanest, most clear way of making this available to tribes and our tribes. And I'd say that, certainly if they don't want to apply, they don't have to. But I'd rather have it in there and ask for them to be removed rather than not have it in there at all as we move forward.
Senator?
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you just repeat exactly the amendment there?
Yep.
Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if you look on page 4, starting on line 6, you'll see Eastern Shoshone or Northern Arapaho tribe or the cooperative tribal governing body. That language would be inserted after local government agencies on page 3, line 15.
So page 4, line 6? Is that
Page
the
3,
language?
page 3, line 14.
Or page?
So it would
but
read the
you're-
board or other state, federal, and local governmental agencies, comma, the Eastern Shoshone or Northern Arapaho tribe or the cooperative tribal governing body. and then another comma probably, as well as nonprofit organizations.
Okay.
And then on line 16, replace the word visitors with non-visitors, or excuse me, non-residents.
Okay. All right. Everybody good with that? So we'll vote. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Okay, we'll move forward with that one. Moving forward to page, what are we on, page 6 now? Or page 4, I guess. Page 4, we just have the board shall meet regularly. So I think we're good there. Then moving on to page 6. Representative Burkhart's suggestion that on line 8, we change the 364203 F to E.
Madam Chairman, I think that's just a typographical correction.
Okay,
that
so
we don't.
we'll-
I don't need.
We
think
don't need an amendment?
Luke already had
Just
that.
make that change. Luke?
Madam Chair and Representative Burkhardt, I agree. I think it was just a typographical error. It just didn't get changed correctly. And I've got it marked, so I'll just go ahead and change
All
that.
right, great.
Madam Chair? Did
Senator-
we cite a compensation, the compensated as a state employer versus legislator?
I think we had some of that discussion. If you'd like to discuss that more, that'd be fine.
Madam Chair, I just think we need to pick.
Well, it says state employees now. Does anybody have a heartburn with leaving it state employees? Okay, so I think we'll just leave it as it's written. Moving on to page 7. Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This reads a little clunky to me, so just to make it a little clearer, I move on page 7, line 12, insert the word before recommendations, and then make recommendations singular rather than plural. And then on line 14, have strike the word those and insert the boards. And then on line 15, making the word recommendation singular again. So it would read, based on the criteria, the board shall make a recommendation regarding the acceptance of any fee simple interest. And then based on the board's recommendation, the Board of Land Commissioners shall make a final determination. I just think that makes it a little clearer.
Okay. Moved by Senator Ellis, seconded by Senator Guru. Is that clear to staff? Okay. Any comments or any discussion? All those in favor say aye. And those opposed say nay. Okay, so that passes. Also on line 7, and Jeremiah's comments about maybe rewording that to move consider the impacts of grant proposals on local communities, then followed by the socioeconomic piece. Is that moved by Senator Schuler, seconded by Senator Baldwin to change that? And if you could get with Jeremiah on that specific language. Any comments on that or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, moving on. Any changes on page 8? Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd move on page 8, line 22, remove the word specific. And after the word financial, insert the words or personal interest.
So remove
this-
specific.
So it would read that no member or employee of the board shall vote or otherwise participate in any matter regarding a contract or project in which he has a financial or personal interest. And just some discussion on that. There are instances where maybe you're not receiving a financial benefit, but you might have a spouse who serves on a nonprofit that's applying for that money. And so there's no benefit, financial benefit, but to me, there'd be a bit of a conflict there. So I just think we should make it a little bit broader, that they can't participate in voting on that one project.
Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Storer, moved by Senator Ellis can you read that again, Senator?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's page 8, line 22, regarding a contract or project in which he has a financial or personal interest. And delete the word specific.
Okay.
Yeah.
So discussion on that. I'm gonna wonder how we define a personal interest. How, if there's something,
Madam Chair?
I don't know, some
Madam Co-Chair.
contract or something.
As legislators, we have to declare personal interests. So an example would be, there was a few years ago when my husband served on the Mixed Martial Arts Commission, and we were appointing board members or voting on something related to their budget. And so I just felt uncomfortable with that personal interest. I think he volunteered to serve on it, so there was no financial gain. But because he was on that commission, or if he was going to be if we were to vote to approve his appointment, those are like the personal. So I think
Okay.
it's defined.
Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. So that passes. Moving on to page 9. Any changes on page 9? Moving on to page 10.
Madam Chair?
Senator Ellis?
Page 10, line 6, I would move to replace the word agency with entity. And that would just make sure that, and I'd ask LSO to look for any other instances where we talk about governmental agencies. If we need to put entity, that just is a little more encompassing of the tribal councils. They're not agents, governmental agencies, they're entities.
Okay.
But I think it would cover the agencies too.
Do I hear a second? Seconded by Senator Schuler. Any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Okay, moving on. Anything else on page 10? Moving to page 11. Anything on page 11? Moving on to page 12. Did we want to look at that language on page 12, line 8? Representative Burkhart, are you good with the way that reads?
Madam Chairman, I think we had a recommendation to change the order, the order of the wording, but I don't remember exactly what that was.
Luke, do you recall?
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhardt, I do recall. So I believe it would be to change that second sentence to the select committee may hold joint meetings with either or both boards.
So that would be my recommended amendment.
Second.
By Representative Burkhart, seconded by by Senator Ellis. I almost gave her an upgrade. But but all in jest. So we will just reword that sentence. Any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Okay, moving on. Anything else on page 12? Nope. Moving on to page 13. Just the resident, non-resident change. I don't think we need an amendment for that. I think that's just, oh, Senator Jones.
Madam Chair, on line 13, I move that we add in parking and staging areas right behind, not limited to, comma, just as we are adding in all these other things, I'm wondering if we shouldn't be specific and add that in as well.
Okay, what's the feeling? Do I have a second? Seconded by Representative Larson. So any discussion on that, adding parking areas to the list of possible projects as with the, but not limited to language? Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think that's a good catch, really, because, we're seeing, particularly since we've added, motorized and non-motorized both, that we'll see some more of those kinds of needs, I think, throughout the state. And so I think that's a really good catch.
All right,
Thank you.
any other discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. And opposed, no. Okay, that passes. Anything else on page 13? Senator Grew.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On page 13, line 8, want to amend to change from 200 back to 400,000 and say, make same change then on page 14, line 2.
Do I hear a second to that? Seconded by Representative Larson. Any discussion?
Madam Chairman,
Representative Burkhart.
I would argue against that change, mainly because we started relatively low with the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund and then built the confidence in it to where we could move it up to 400,000. And I think that's the situation here. Start lower, we can always adjust it later after we see what the board does and all of that. So I'm a no vote on that one.
Okay. Representative Larson.
So thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So I think from what I recall, the reason why we changed it in other legislation was due to inflation. So that's why I would be in support of this is, I mean, are we just going to be coming back in a couple of years and with the argument of inflation to increase the project size? So.
Representative Angeles.
Madam Chair, I'd like to piggyback off of Representative Burkhart that in the working group, that was what we discussed, just that the other trust fund has had such a great, reputation, and they've built that over the years. And so the working group did decide to keep it at 200,000 just to build that up. Not saying we can't come back to address inflation, but just to build that trust, especially among the public.
Okay. Any other comments? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. What? Okay. We're going to redo. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. No. Let's say a raise of hands. So all those in favor? 2, 3. All those opposed? So, okay, so that one fails. Representative Byron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, looking and working off my colleague's suggestion, I really think we should consider discussion about adding a period on page 13, line 12, at recreational activities period, and strike the remainder of that paragraph. You know, I don't want to tie us, and this is a very, outdoor recreation infrastructure is a very broad topic. So I would not want to have anyone coming to bring a proposal or ask for grant to be limited because it's something that might be out of the box. So I ask for favorable consideration to page 13, line 12, put a period after recreational activities and strike the remainder.
Okay, do I hear a second? Who was that? Seconded by Senator Baldwin, moved by Representative Byron. Any discussion on that? I'm just going to say that I think it gives some guidance to people on what are acceptable uses of this money, but I'm not going to say we can't do that in rule either. Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. That was kind of my thought as well, is that if we do adopt this amendment and it does get enacted, it still wouldn't preclude folks from including any of these types of things. I mean, I think anybody who's an outdoor enthusiast would think that a boat launch is probably within the category of outdoor recreational experiences. It might help for the sake of the commission to have those additional sideboards, but I think it's a little bit of 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with Representative Western to a point, but because I like things kind of a little more clear, but I think in terms of transparency for the public and them understanding the differences between a wildlife trust fund and this one, throwing some of those ideas out there of what some of those things might be, even though it might not limit to those, I think this works better. So I would say I would be against the amendment.
Any other discussion? Senator or Representative Burkhart.
Madam Chairman, the one thing is, I don't think this sets sideboards because it says including but not limited to, which still opens it up to everything. I support the amendment. Just eliminate all that wording and let the board do what they need to do.
Representative Byron.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Yeah, and I mean, without trying to get too far in the weeds, boat launches, boats landings. I mean, we could go really deep into this. So It's just my intent here and to ask for consideration to keep it more vague and ask the established board to really have that ability to figure out, you know, what their preference is.
Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. Okay, let's see a raise of hands. All those in favor? All those opposed? So that fails. Okay, moving on. Anything else on page 13? Moving on to page 14. Senator Ellis.
Madam Chair, I move on page 14, line 21, to remove the suggested insertion of are intended to and just leave it as shall.
Okay, and do I have a second? Seconded by Representative Burkhart. Any discussion on the shall or the may are intended to?
Madam Chair, just some discussion. We put the word shall in our statutes all the time, and I think that a future legislature, if they don't want these funds to be considered inviolate, they just remove the word shall. And then this is really a provision that has to do with like what really is protected as far as funds. The only really protected things are those that we've established in our Constitution. So when we set up these trust funds, nothing prevents future legislatures from raiding those funds and saying, we're going to abolish it and move this money elsewhere. We can't do that with constitutionally created funds. So that's where this language is, it's kind of tied to that notion, kind of recognizing our limits. But I just think the word shall, a future legislature, if they want to dissolve this fund, can, they remove the word shall. So I just think we should get away from this are intended to. And I know maybe I'm disagreeing with LSO drafting conventions, but you also don't want someone to read this and think it's squishy language, that it opens the door to me, the are intended to opens the door to dissolve it. So I think we should just leave the word shall.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? Okay, so that passes. Moving, anything else on page 14? Moving on to page 15. My notes say on page 15, line 13, to remove from time to time. Moved by Senator Grew, seconded by Senator Ellis. Any discussion on that? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? Okay. Moving on to page 16. There was discussion on line 10 to add construction into the list of possible uses. Moved by Representative Larson, seconded by Senator Schuler. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And then that same page, Representative Burkhart, you seem to have a challenge with the 200,000 exceeding, or I don't know if you wanted to.
Madam Chairman, I'm trying to think in my head real quick, a suggested amendment here.
Okay. Do you want us to move on and circle back?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
All right, so we will move on to page 17. Any changes on page 17? Moving on to page 18. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have an amendment, but I did email all of you. Kickbacks is defined in Title VI. I don't know if anyone's really worried about referencing as defined in Title VI with the statutory citation, but it's in your email inboxes. I'm okay leaving it as is.
Okay. Anything else on page 18? Moving, Senator Grew.
Thank you. Luke, I need some help here. Is this, we don't want that money to tip period of time. Is this where we address it, or you want to address it the next one, which is the best place to do it? Change the timing commencing?
Yeah. Madam Chair, Senator Guru, I do think if you want to leave this provision in and change the time, I would do it here. This is the one where, I guess, if you're looking to do the split, like if you're still saying we want to wait to do the split. Yeah, so then it would be in section 3. Section 4, that is just amending the prior appropriation language, and it just says that the money can be split.
Okay. So, can I ask one more question?
Oh,
before I
yes,
make a
absolutely.
motion? I just want to make
Senator
sure so you do it here on 18, line 9. So if you wanted to say, go out another biennium, so you maybe make it to 28, correct?
Madam Chair, Senator Guru. So yeah, I guess, I think it's really kind of whenever you'd like to do it, right? So if you want to change it to commencing on July 1st, 2026 and ending on June 30th, 2028, or I think you could just choose the year that you'd like to do if you want to keep that in there.
Okay, Madam Chair.
Okay.
I'd move then that we do make that change to change to July 1st, 2026 and to June 30th, 2028.
Seconded, moved by Senator Guru, seconded by Representative Larson. So the gist of this is that until the biennium of 2028, all the money would go into the corpus. I guess that's the gist of what we're talking about. So any discussion about that?
Sure.
Senator Gru.
Yep, thank you. The purpose is we want to try our best to grow this fund as quickly as possible. Use the markets to compound the savings into a fund that we can truly use. I understand the logic about and the desire to spend some of the money now to get some projects on the ground to prove that it works. I think it's going to work, and I don't have any question about that. I want to get that fund as high as it can be, as soon as it can be, so we can really be effective and start using it. In addition, we have funds available. We do have ARPA funds, and while it seems from testimony we've heard today that there may be limiting, I think that in subsequent funds and with redeployment of some funds that have been allocated in the next session, next budget session, we might be able to improve upon that. We may not, but we may be able to do that. And I think there are other funds available to do that, to get projects on the ground and still have this fund grow at a rate and get the total return off our investment. And that's the purpose of this motion. It's not to stop anything. It's not to hold anything back. It's to actually get the money, get the account to its maximum, to that 200 million as fast as possible.
So I have a question about that, because we have funding in here for the board expenses. So do we need to do an appropriation, or how would we use the board and fund that?
Madam Chair, if I might,
Senator
if the motion passes, I would then make a subsequent motion that we ask the JAC to appropriate such money as necessary to fund until that happens.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion about this amendment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. Let's do a raise of hands. All those in favor, raise your hand. So there's 8. Okay. And all those opposed? Okay, so that passes. So looking for an additional amendment, Senator?
I would move that we add language to direct, or to, I mean, I don't know, Luke, should we put in a number and ask for that, or what's the best way from your perspective?
Luke?
Madam Chair, Senator Guru, I guess I just don't know what it would cost. And so, I mean, certainly we can, and that can be changed later if you want to put an appropriation here or.
I don't.
Or yeah, or that could go through like maybe more of the regular budget process. I don't know. I guess it'd be kind of up to the committee. I just can't tell you if it's going to cost thousands of dollars more than that. I'm just not sure. I hate to say.
Senator, or Representative Burkhart.
Madam Chairman, I think that Senator Ellis may have a amendment on the effective date, which I think would clarify all of this because the money's already been appropriated to $6 million in the last legislature. So if you make this effective, the money's already there. If you make it effective, as Senator Ellis is, I think she's going to propose an amendment. Then the money's there. You don't have to have a separate appropriation.
The challenge is that all the money's in the corpus. There's no money in the income account to be spent out.
Okay. All right.
Senator Ellis?
I'm looking at Senator Gru, is that correct?
Well, now I'm not sure. Go back now to the amendment that's in session, or what's in session law. Did we do that 4 and 2?
Madam Chair, Senator Guru, no, there's only $6 million in the corpus of the trust account. So I don't believe there's any money in the income. The income account is created by this bill. So there is no money in there.
So from what I just heard, you said the motion should be then just to put in maybe a line saying we'd ask the JAC to put in an appropriate amount to staff funding.
Madam Chair,
Senator Ellis?
Senator Gru, I think, when we create task forces and the like, I think we usually do something like 30 or 50,000. We could put that in there as a specific placeholder.
There you go.
And then that's a way to get feedback from JAC. I don't think we can be squishy with what we put in there, that an appropriate amount. I think it's got to be 30, 50,000, something like that.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I think that might be, a good way to go.
Is that a lot like
Maybe more standard.
an amendment?
Madam Chair, I move that we would insert a new section, and I don't know where I'd ask our LSO's guidance on that. There shall be appropriated 50,000, and then the language being for appointed members to do their work. Isn't that an artful thing?
For board expenses?
For board members to be appointed, receive reimbursement. I trust whatever language, but so that they can do their work.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Representative
question,
Burkhart.
instead of appropriating a separate amount, can we appropriate it out of the trust fund account?
I think that'd be a friendly amendment for me.
Okay.
So with that, I'll second that then.
Okay.
So let me get clear on this. So you're suggesting that we say out of the trust fund, we put 50,000 from the trust fund into the income account to be used for board expense.
Madam Chair, for the purpose of board expense.
Is everybody clear on that? Okay. Any other discussion on that? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? Okay. We'll move forward with that. Anything else on page 18? Page 19, anything on page 19?
I don't think we need it, but.
Page 20. So we have the effective date conversation. What's the feeling of the group on the effective date?
Madam Chair, I like the effective date being July 1st, 2024, in case there was any question about that. So I think we should leave all of that and just delete the staff comments.
Okay. A second on that? Seconded by
Madam Chair,
Senator Schuler.
I don't think we need to second or anything. It's already there.
Oh, so we'll just leave it as it's written. Okay. All right, thank you for that clarity. Okay. Anybody else have any other?
Madam Chair, if we could back up to page 18.
Okay.
I would suggest line 22, the addition of before exceed to insert equal or exceed a total, and then so it'll read, large project not to equal or exceed a total of an additional $200,000. So it can't equal it or exceed it.
So page 16.
Page 16, yes, I'm
Line
sorry.
22.
Yeah.
So read that again, Representative, please.
On line 22, it would read, large project not to equal or exceed 200,000. And then that, to me, it's just conforming to make it conform with the other where we set 200,000 as the large project bottom that, or floor that they need to go to the legislature for. This just, to me, it's just conforming to say we won't hit the 200,000. That's all.
Okay. Seconded by Representative Larson, moved by Representative Burkhart. Any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Okay, that one passes. Anything else in any other page of the bill? Question on the bill being called? All those in favor say aye. Oh, roll call, sorry.
This is a roll call vote for 24 LSO 33 Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Trust Fund Administration as amended. Senator Baldwin?
Aye.
Senator Ellis? Senator Guru?
Aye.
Senator Jones? Representative Angelos? Representative Burkhart? Representative Byron?
Aye.
Representative Larson? Representative Singh? Representative Storer? Representative Western? Representative Winter? Co-Chairman Schuler?
Aye.
Chairman Newsom?
Aye.
That passes.
Thank you so much, Luke, for taking us through this. That was really good. Thank you, committee. Do we need some guidance on our field trip? So what's our plan, field trip plan? Do we have some directions? Okay. So in your packet, as pointed out by my co-chairman, there are directions to Great Reef Road. So we will have lunch and then, do we want to carpool? Or how long does it take to get there from?
Madam Chair. We may have lost the crowd.
Okay, so hey.
Madam Chair, I just included in your packet of materials, it should be in there. So there is an address.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's quite, is it included in the? No? So, yeah, so we can send this tour information again, but it's going to start at 1:30 and it's have the committee meet at the Great Reef Boat Ramp off of Highway 220 South.
Okay.
So
So
we can send
do-
this
do
again,
we
but
know
yeah, so it would
how-
be there at 1:30.
Do we know how long it takes to get from here to there? 30 minutes, okay. So we will break for
25, 30.
lunch and reconvene there at 1:30. If you want to set up carpools, you can do that with each other. Okay? So we're out. Can we leave things here? Okay. I'll take my computer, yeah.